Victor Ashford didn't flinch when he signed the order. He sat behind his mahogany desk, fountain pen moving with the calm precision of a man who had spent 70 years deciding other people's fates, and he forged his daughter-in-law's signature on a letter that didn't exist. The letter said she had chosen someone else, that the baby wasn't his son's, that she wanted nothing, not money, not contact, not the name. Victor read it over once, nodded to himself, and slid it across the desk to the attorney he'd kept on private retainer for exactly these kinds of situations. "Make sure Damien sees this before the weekend," he said. Then he poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and went back to reviewing quarterly earnings. He never lost a night of sleep over it. Not once. If you've stayed with us this far, please hit the like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began to fall apart. The morning the 642 Express derailed outside of Millbrook Station, Damien Ashford was sitting in the back of a black SUV reading a briefing document about hospital acquisition targets in 3 Midwestern cities. His assistant, a meticulous young man named Preston who never spoke unless spoken to, had flagged the document as urgent. Damien was on page 7, annotating margins in blue ink, when his phone lit up with a news alert. Breaking. Commuter train derailment, Chicago. Multiple casualties reported. Emergency services en route. He read it twice, set the phone face down on the seat beside him. "Change of route," he said. Preston looked up. "Sir?" "We're going to Northwestern Memorial." It wasn't a question. Preston immediately began adjusting the GPS and making calls, and Damien went back to his document for approximately 40 seconds before he gave up and put it away. Something about the alert had unsettled him in a way he couldn't immediately identify. He'd been to disaster sites before. His foundation had donated equipment to 3 trauma centers in the past 18 months. This was supposed to be routine. A check presentation, some photographs, a statement about the Ashford Medical Innovation Fund's ongoing commitment to emergency infrastructure. Routine. He kept telling himself that. The emergency entrance at Northwestern Memorial was controlled chaos when his vehicle arrived. Ambulances 3 deep in the bay, portable lighting being set up, hospital staff moving in the particular way that trained people move when there are more patients than beds. Fast, deliberate, no wasted motion. A hospital administrator Damien had met at a gala 2 years ago intercepted him near the sliding doors, shaking his hand with a grip that communicated both gratitude and profound exhaustion. "Mr. Ashford, the ventilators arrived an hour ago. Dr. Kimura's team is already using them." The administrator, whose name Damien had temporarily lost, gestured toward the building. "We have 47 confirmed casualties, 12 critical. It would mean a great deal to the staff if you—" "Of course," Damien said. "Whatever you need." He meant it as a formality. He said it the way he said most things in public, smoothly, completely, without visible seams. A camera crew from a local news affiliate had followed the equipment delivery, and there was a communications person from his foundation hovering nearby with a prepared statement. Damien had done this kind of thing dozens of times. Walk through the facility, express admiration for the medical staff, shake hands, let the cameras capture whatever they needed to capture. Move on. He followed the administrator through a set of heavy double doors into the main trauma corridor, and then he stopped walking. He stopped so abruptly that Preston walked directly into his back. Across the corridor, past the supply carts, and the moving gurneys and the noise that was everywhere, a surgeon stood at a procedure table with her back to him. The OR scrubs were dark blue, nearly soaked through at the shoulders. Her hands were working inside a chest cavity with a controlled certainty that Damien recognized from another life, another version of himself who used to sit in hospital waiting rooms reading about cardiac procedures so he could understand what she was describing at dinner. He knew those hands. He knew the specific angle of those shoulders when she was focused, slightly forward, weight transferred to the balls of her feet, spine straight in a way that looked rigid but was actually the opposite of rigid, built for endurance. He knew her. 4 years had not changed the most fundamental thing, which was that he would always know her in a crowd of 1,000 people, even from behind, even covered in evidence of 18 hours of continuous work that he didn't yet know about but could feel in the set of her body. "Nora," he said. He said it quietly. She couldn't have heard him over the noise. She didn't turn. He stood there for a long moment doing nothing, which was not something Damien Ashford did often. Around him, the corridor continued functioning. A nurse asked if someone could check on Bay 7. An overhead announcement called for additional blood products. Preston said something near his ear that Damien completely failed to hear. He watched Nora Callahan's hands save a man's life. She didn't know he was there. They had met 11 years ago at a medical technology conference in San Francisco, which was not the kind of place where Damien typically encountered women who interested him. He'd gone because his company was presenting a prototype diagnostic algorithm, and she had gone because her residency program had sent 3 attending physicians to evaluate new trauma technology. And she had been the one who raised her hand during the Q&A to point out, politely but without any softening of the critique, that his algorithm produced a 17% error rate in patients over 65. The room had gone slightly quiet. "We're aware of the limitation," Damien had said from the stage. "It's on the roadmap." The roadmap. She'd written something in her notebook. Not looking up. "Is the roadmap going to apologize to the 65-year-old with a missed pulmonary embolism?" Someone in the front row had laughed uncomfortably. Damien had found her at the reception afterward, not to defend himself. He'd realized almost immediately that she was right, but because he'd spent the rest of the panel thinking about the problem she'd identified and had 2 possible solutions he wanted to discuss with someone who would actually engage with them. She'd been standing alone by a window with a glass of sparkling water, still making notes, and she'd looked up when he approached with an expression that was prepared to be politely uninterested. He'd started with, "The 65-year-old with the pulmonary embolism. I've been thinking about it." She'd looked at him for a moment. "So have I." They'd talked for 3 hours. He asked for her number at 11:30. She gave him her work email instead. He'd thought about that for years afterward. The very specific kind of caution in the gesture. The preference for a channel that could be ignored professionally if she chose to ignore it. The fact that she hadn't outright declined. He'd emailed her at 7 in the morning from the airport. Subject line: algorithm flaw. Specifically the kind that gets people killed. She'd responded by 10 with 4 paragraphs of detailed analysis that he'd forwarded to his entire engineering team. They'd been married 14 months later. Their friends called it fast. His father called it reckless. Damien called it the first decision in his adult life that required absolutely no deliberation. Standing in the trauma corridor 4 years after signing papers he'd barely been able to hold steady enough to sign, Damien thought about the conference. About the way she'd looked up from her notebook. About the email with the terrible subject line that had somehow worked. He thought about all the things that had gone wrong between then and now, and standing here watching her work, he was struck by the same useless, bewildering clarity that had been hitting him in unguarded moments for 4 years. He had never fully understood how it ended. He knew the sequence of events. He knew the documents he'd been shown, the explanations he'd been given, the logical scaffolding his father had helped him build around what had happened. He understood it the way you understand a car accident. Here's the sequence of events. Here's the physics. Here's the outcome. But understanding the mechanics had never made it feel real. She finished, stepped back from the table, said something to the resident beside her, stripped her outer gloves and dropped them in the waste bin without looking. Turned. She saw him. For a fraction of a second, her face did something that she immediately controlled. He saw it anyway. The recognition, and behind it, something complicated enough that he couldn't name it. Then the professional surface came back and she looked away, speaking to the same resident, pointing at something on the monitoring display. She walked to the next station. She didn't acknowledge him. Damien stood in the corridor for another full minute. Then Preston touched his elbow very carefully and said, "Mr. Ashford, Administrator Hendricks, is asking about the press statement," and Damien said, "Give me 5 minutes," and walked in the direction Nora had gone. He found her in a supply alcove off the main corridor, not hiding. She didn't hide. He'd never known her to hide from anything. But taking exactly 60 seconds away from the floor to drink half a bottle of water and check something on a tablet. When he pushed open the door, she looked up, and this time the complicated thing on her face stayed there longer before she could put it away. "Damien." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. That specific flatness she used when she was managing something. "I didn't know you were here," he said. "I transferred 18 months ago." She went back to the tablet. The trauma program is one of the best in the state. I know, I've read about it. He hadn't known she was there specifically, but he'd read about the program. He didn't add that. Are you? He stopped, started again. How are you? She looked at him. The question clearly landed as insufficient given the context, and she was clearly deciding how to respond to insufficiency. I'm in the middle of a mass casualty event, Damien. I know, I can see that. Your foundation sent the equipment. Her voice shifted slightly, something that might have been gratitude in different circumstances. The portable ventilators are already running. That was the right call. It wasn't, he almost said it wasn't supposed to be you. Stopped himself. I'm glad they're useful. She put the tablet down, looked at him directly, which was something Nora did when she was about to say something she'd decided needed to be said directly. He'd always appreciated that about her and dreaded it equally. This isn't the time, she said. I have patience. I know. Then why are you standing in my supply alcove? Because I saw you and couldn't not follow. Because 4 years hasn't made this thing in my chest any smaller. Because I still have the email where you told me about the algorithm flaw, and I've read it probably 40 times for reasons I can't fully defend. What he said was, I just wanted to say hello. Nora picked up her tablet. Hello, Damien. She moved toward the door, and he stepped aside. She paused in the doorway without turning. Thank you for the ventilators. She went back to work. He stood in the supply alcove for a moment longer than was probably dignified. Then he went and found Preston and the administrator and gave the statement to the cameras and shook the hands that needed shaking, and he did all of it with the practiced fluency of someone who had learned long ago to function completely, while something essential inside them was in freefall. The press statement took 12 minutes. Damien was walking back through the corridor toward the exit, head already full of the meeting he was supposed to be at in 40 minutes, the acquisition document on the back seat, the 17 things Preston was going to tell him about as soon as they got back to the car, when he heard a sound that didn't belong. Small feet running. That specific slapping on tile sound that only exists when someone under 4 feet tall is moving as fast as they can move, which is always faster than any adult expects. He turned. A child burst through a side door that had been propped open. How she'd gotten past the restricted corridor was a question that would be asked later and never satisfactorily answered, and sprinted down the hallway with the full-body commitment of someone who had been waiting to do exactly this for hours. She was carrying a lunchbox, handmade, covered in uneven painted flowers, the kind of thing that gets made at a small kitchen table with a 4-year-old's total artistic conviction. She ran straight to Nora, who had emerged from a bay and turned at exactly the right moment, because she always somehow turned at exactly the right moment. Mama! The child threw her arms around Nora's waist with a force that would have knocked most people sideways. Nora caught her, absorbed the impact, and bent down immediately, all the exhaustion dropping away in the specific instant of contact. Lily. Nora's voice was different, softer, something in it that Damien had only heard directed at him once, a long time ago. Who let you through the door, Bug? You're supposed to stay with Miss Rita. Miss Rita's phone died and she couldn't call you, and I made you lunch because you forgot and I painted the box. The child pulled back far enough to hold up the lunchbox. See? Flowers. I see flowers. Nora took it. Beautiful flowers. I know. Zero false modesty. I'm good at them. Nora laughed, a real one, exhausted and full. And it was the first time Damien had heard her laugh in 4 years, and the sound hit him somewhere specific, somewhere he'd thought had scar tissue over it. He should have looked away. He didn't. The child turned around because children always turn around eventually, drawn by peripheral motion, by the awareness of being observed. She looked at Damien with the completely unguarded directness of someone who hadn't yet learned to pretend she hadn't noticed you. She studied him. The lunchbox dropped slightly in her grip. Damien looked at her eyes. Something happened to him that he didn't have clinical language for. Something that started somewhere in his sternum and moved outward. Something with a physical component that made him grip the wall beside him with one hand without meaning to. Her eyes were his eyes. Not a resemblance, not a vague similarity that might be attributed to coincidence. His eyes. The same dark gray with the ring of deeper color at the outside edge. His mother's eyes, which had been his eyes, which were apparently now staring at him from a 4-year-old's face with total innocent directness. This child's eyes. Nora had gone very still. Damien looked at her. Nora was watching him with an expression he'd never seen on her before. It was the expression of someone who has been bracing for a particular impact for a long time and has just heard the sound of it beginning. He looked back at the child. "Hi," the child said. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I'm Lily," she said helpfully. "Who are you?" Somewhere in the distance, a monitor was alarming. A PA system was calling for a respiratory team. The mass casualty event was continuing around them, the building full of controlled emergency, and Damien Ashford stood in the middle of a hospital corridor with his hand on the wall and his world performing a slow, complete reorganization of everything he'd believed for 4 years. He looked at Nora. She looked back at him. "Lily," Nora said quietly. Her voice was steady. It cost her something to make it steady. He could see that too. "Go wait in the family room. I'll be right there." "But I brought lunch." "I know. I'm very happy about the lunch. Go wait, Bug. 2 minutes." Lily evaluated this negotiation, apparently found the terms acceptable, and trotted off down the corridor with the lunchbox swinging. She didn't look back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the hospital continued to function. "Nora." His voice came out differently than he'd intended. Rougher. "How old is she?" A long pause. 4, Nora said. He did the math. He'd done it already, instantly, before he'd even asked. He'd done it in the 3 seconds he'd spent looking at his own eyes in a child's face. But hearing her say it made it real in a way the math hadn't. "She's mine." It wasn't a question. They both knew it wasn't a question. Nora's jaw tightened by a fraction. "This is not the time or place for this conversation." "I know." He released the wall. He hadn't realized how hard he'd been gripping it. "But I need to know that we're going to have it." She looked at him for a long moment. The complicated thing was back on her face, and this time it had company. Grief, maybe. Old, worn, smooth grief that had been living alongside her for a while. "I'll call you," she said, "after my shift." "Your shift ends when?" "When the patients are stable." Which meant, they both knew, an indeterminate time that could be anywhere from 3 hours to 3 days. Damien looked at her. She held his gaze without blinking, and he thought about her at the conference with her notebook, writing down the error rate. He thought about all the things that were wrong with everything he'd believed for 4 years. "I'll wait," he said. "Damien, I'll be in the family waiting area, or I'll wait in my car, or I'll wait in the parking lot." He heard himself and stopped. "I'll wait wherever is appropriate and not disruptive to your work. But I'm not leaving this building until we talk." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked in the direction Lily had gone. When she turned back, something had shifted. She was already pulling back, putting on the professional composure like a surgical gown. But underneath it, something had shifted. "Family waiting room," she said. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't let your foundation people take pictures in this building. And don't—" She stopped. "Don't what?" "Don't talk to her again. Not until we've talked. Please." He heard the please, understood what it cost her. "Okay," he said. She went back to her patients. But the family waiting room at Northwestern Memorial was the particular kind of uncomfortable that hospital waiting rooms always are. Chairs that were selected for durability rather than any consideration of the human body. Television bolted high on the wall tuned to a news channel with the sound off. A table with magazines from 6 months ago fanned out in a careful arrangement that nobody touched. The lighting was the specific fluorescent tone that makes everyone look slightly unwell. Damien sat in a chair near the window and sent Preston home. Preston did not want to go home. Preston had 17 things on the agenda and a meeting at 2 that was apparently time-sensitive, and he communicated all of this in the politely urgent way that Preston communicated urgent things. "Reschedule it," Damien said. "Sir, the Tokyo, reschedule everything." Preston went home. Damien sat in the chair. He was not accustomed to waiting. He ran a company with 23,000 employees and a market cap that occasionally made the front page of financial publications, and waiting was something other people did while he made decisions. He had not sat in a waiting room since, he thought about it. He genuinely could not remember the last time he had sat in a waiting room without his phone and a document and a call being patched through. Waiting as the actual activity, the sole activity, without work filling the gaps. He put his phone face down on his thigh and looked out the window. 4 years. He was thinking about the sequence. His father's office. The afternoon Victor had sat him down and put the documents on the desk. Damien had been in bad shape by then, 3 weeks after Nora had left, or what he'd understood as Nora leaving, unable to eat properly, functioning on the fumes of work, and the particular stubborn refusal to fall apart that had gotten him through difficult things since adolescence. Victor had been the voice of calm reason. Victor, who had always positioned himself as the voice of calm reason. Son, I didn't want to show you this, but I think you need to know. The letter, the private investigator's photographs, the documents that explained neatly and completely why Nora had ended the marriage, why she hadn't wanted to discuss it, why she'd moved out without a conversation. Damien had stared at the documents for a long time. She made her choice, Victor had said. The baby wasn't something she was planning to continue with. I spoke to her attorney. It's all very clear. Let us handle the settlement so she's taken care of, and you can move forward. He'd signed the divorce papers 2 days later. His hands hadn't been completely steady. He'd told himself it was anger. Now, sitting in the waiting room with the sound-off news cycling on the screen above him, Damien thought about his father's face during that conversation. The specific neutrality of it. Victor Ashford in his 70s was a man who'd long since mastered the art of performing whatever emotion was most useful in a given situation. Damien had always known this about his father, had respected it professionally, had never turned it on himself as a lens. He thought about Lily's eyes. She'd said hi to him. Like it was simple. Like there was nothing complicated about it. I'm Lily. Who are you? He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum. Booms. Nora found him at 9:47 that evening. She looked worse than she had 8 hours ago, which was what 8 more hours of mass casualty response did to a person. She'd changed her scrubs at some point, these were clean, but her hair was down from wherever it had been pinned, and there were lines around her eyes that were partly exhaustion and partly something else. She sat in the chair across from him, not beside him, the table with the fanned-out magazines between them. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She's healthy, Nora said finally. In case you're wondering, completely healthy. Strong as a... She stopped. She's healthy. Good. His voice came out steady. He'd had 8 hours to get it steady. That's good. Nora looked at her hands. She had a specific way of looking at her hands that she did when she was about to say something difficult, a habit he'd forgotten he remembered. When I found out I was pregnant, she said, it was 2 weeks after I moved out. She didn't look up. I called your father's office because She stopped again. Something hardening briefly in her expression before she smoothed it. Because your number had been disconnected, or the number I had been disconnected. I don't know which. Damien went very still. Victor's assistant said he'd pass along the message. Nora continued looking at her hands. And then Victor called me back himself. He told me you knew, that you'd already spoken to attorneys about it. A pause that was very carefully calibrated. That you didn't want, that you'd decided not to be involved. That the terms of the settlement made that clear. The words arrived in Damien's chest the way very cold things arrive, slowly, with a specific spreading sensation. He told me the same thing, Damien said. About you. Nora looked up. They looked at each other across the table with the outdated magazines. He told me, Damien said carefully, the way you speak when you're managing something that wants to not be managed, that you had made a decision about the pregnancy, that you didn't want my involvement, that your attorney had communicated this. Nora's face did several things in sequence. First something that looked like the physical impact of information, then something that closed over it. Then, underneath both of those, something that had been sitting in her for years and had now received a missing piece. He lied to both of us, she said. Not a question. Yes. She looked away, out the window. The parking lot lights made rectangular patterns on the glass. Damien thought about his father with the fountain pen, unhurried. He didn't know about the fountain pen yet. That would come later, the investigation that would unravel everything. But he knew his father, and sitting in this waiting room with the math of 4 years arranged in front of him, he could sketch the shape of what had happened with horrible clarity. "I should have tried harder," he said, "to contact you directly. I should have—" "Don't." Her voice was flat, not unkind, but final. "I've spent 4 years not doing that to myself. I'm not going to let you do it either. I'm not trying to. You're going to say all the things we should have done, and you might be right about all of them, but it doesn't—" She pressed her fingertips against her mouth briefly, a gesture he didn't recognize, new since he'd known her, something she'd developed in the years in between. "Lily is 4 years old. She's never known anything else. She has a life that I built for her, and it is a good life, Damien. It is not the life I would have chosen under different circumstances, but it is good, and she is—" Her voice did something, controlled it. "She is safe, and she is happy, and she does not know what she's missing because she doesn't know what she's missing." "I know." He kept his voice even with effort. Nora, I'm not here to disrupt anything. I understand that I am 4 years late. I understand that." "Do you?" The question was genuine. Not an attack, not sarcasm. A real question. He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "Probably not fully. I don't think I can yet." She studied him. Nora had always studied people the way she read medical literature, looking for the detail that changed the interpretation. "She asked me about her father," Nora said, "about 6 months ago. She was going through a phase where she was cataloging everything in her world. She asked about dogs and the ocean and where thunder comes from, and then she asked where her dad was." A pause. "I told her that her dad didn't know she existed yet. That was the truest thing I could say." Damien sat with that. "She seemed to accept it," Nora said. "Like thunder. Just a fact about the world." "She said she'd been waiting," he said. Nora looked at him sharply. "Before you sent her to the family room." "She didn't say it to me. She said it. She was talking to herself, I think. She looked at me and then she said she'd been waiting." He paused. "I might have misheard." Nora's expression shifted through something he couldn't entirely read. She looked back at the window. "She didn't misidentify you," Nora said quietly. "She's never seen a picture of you, but she—" A breath. "She knew." The room was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to take anything from you," Damien said. "I want to be clear about that. There won't be lawyers. There won't be a custody action. I'm not going to use resources to maneuver around you." He paused. "I know that I could. I'm telling you I won't." Nora looked at him. "Why?" "Because she's your daughter. Whatever else is true, she's your daughter first. You've been her world for 4 years and I haven't been anything." He said it plainly because it was plain. "I don't want to be a disruption. I want to—" He stopped. The next sentence wanted to be too large. He scaled it down. "I'd like to meet her, properly, if that's something you'd consider." The silence stretched. "I need time to think," Nora said. "Okay. I mean it. I need time. Not days. I need more than days." "Okay." She looked at him again with the studying expression. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find an approximation of it. "You've changed," she said. Not a compliment, not a criticism, an observation. "Probably," he said. "You'd know better than me." She stood up, straightened the scrubs that were already straight, a gesture that meant she was closing the conversation. "I'll call you," she said again, "when I've had time." He stood. "Thank you for talking to me." She paused. "Thank you for waiting." Another pause, shorter. "Damien, what your father said to you—" She stopped. "We'll talk about it. When I've had time to—" She shook her head. "We'll talk." She walked out. He stood in the waiting room for a moment, listening to her footsteps fade. Then he sat back down in the uncomfortable chair and stayed there for another 20 minutes, not reading anything, not calling anyone, not making any decisions. Just sitting. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in November. Cold, unglamorous, real. He thought about his father. He thought about a 4-year-old girl with his eyes and a handmade lunchbox and no concept whatsoever of false modesty. I'm good at them. She probably was. He sat in the uncomfortable chair and thought about everything that had been true for 4 years that wasn't, and everything that had been a lie that wasn't that either. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, something that had been frozen for a long time began, very slowly, to move. He called his father the next morning. Not from the office, not with Preston in the room taking notes. He called from his apartment, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee that he hadn't touched, watching the gray November sky flatten itself against the windows of the buildings across the street. Victor answered on the second ring, which he always did, because Victor Ashford believed that answering quickly communicated control of the situation. Damien, I heard about the train derailment. The Foundation's response was well handled. I saw the coverage. I saw Nora yesterday, Damien said. A pause. Very brief. Someone less familiar with Victor's rhythms might not have caught it. Nora. His father's voice carried the careful neutrality of a man reaching for the right container. At the hospital? She transferred to Northwestern 18 months ago. She's running trauma surgery. He paused. She has a daughter, Dad. A 4-year-old girl. Silence. Not the considering kind. The managing kind. Damien, her name is Lily. He kept his voice even by main force. She has my eyes. Nora confirmed she's mine. He set the coffee cup down on the counter very carefully. I'd like you to tell me what you know about how this happened. Son, you're upset. This is a shock. I understand that. Why don't you come to the house and we can sit down and I'm not coming to the house. He had thought about that specifically. He was not going to sit in his father's office and let his father arrange the furniture of this conversation the way he arranged everything else. I'm asking you directly. What did you tell Nora when she contacted you during the divorce? Another pause. This one was longer, which meant the calculation was more complex. I was protecting you, Victor said. The words arrived with a specific quality. Not denial, which Damien had braced for, but justification, which was somehow worse, because justification meant acknowledgement. She contacted your office, Damien said. She was confused. She told you about the pregnancy, and you told her I didn't want to be involved. The marriage was over, Damien. Whatever she was planning to stop. He hadn't raised his voice. He realized the deliberateness of that only after the fact, the decision to stay level, because level was harder to dismiss than anger. Don't explain the reasoning, just tell me what you did. Victor Ashford was silent for a longer time than Damien had ever heard him be silent on the phone. The girl would have complicated everything, his father said finally. A child with her background, with her family's. The foundation was in the middle of a critical restructuring. The board had concerns about image, about stability. You weren't thinking clearly. What did you do? Damien said. Specifically. I managed the situation. His father's voice had shifted to the register he used in depositions, the one that didn't commit to specifics while technically not lying. I protected the Ashford name. That has always been my responsibility. Did you forge documents? Silence. Dad? I handled the legal communications through appropriate channels. Everything was Victor. He never used his father's first name. He heard his father register it. I'm going to have an attorney review everything from that period. Every document, every communication. I'm telling you this directly. I am not asking for your help or your permission. I am telling you what I'm going to do. His father's breathing changed, just slightly. You'd do that to this family. You already did something to this family. He picked up the coffee, found it cold, set it back down. I'm going to fix it. He hung up. He stood at the kitchen counter for a long time after that, looking at nothing. Then he picked up his phone and called the one attorney he trusted completely, a woman named Gretchen Hale, who had represented him personally, not the corporation, not the foundation, him, for 6 years, and who had the particular quality of never making him feel managed. I need everything from the Callahan divorce, he said when she answered. Every document, every communication, particularly anything that came through my father's office. Gretchen was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. How quickly do you need it? Yesterday. Then I'll start with the week before. Nora took 9 days. He hadn't expected 9 days. He'd expected weeks, possibly months, possibly a silence that would need to be broken by some other means. 9 days felt almost fast, And when he answered the phone and heard her voice, something that had been held at uncomfortable tension for those 9 days released slightly without him meaning it to. "I've been thinking," she said. No preamble, which was Nora. I assumed. "I talked to my sister. I talked to a colleague I trust." A pause. "I didn't tell them about your father yet. What we discussed about what he told me. I need more before I do anything with that. Gretchen is working on it, my attorney." "I know you said that." Her voice didn't give him anything. "I'm not asking about that right now. I'm asking about Lily." "Okay. She's been asking about you," Nora said. It sounded like it cost her something to say it. "She doesn't know who you are, obviously. She told Miss Rita, her sitter, that she met someone at the hospital who had her same eyes, and she wanted to know if that was a coincidence or if it was the thing she'd been waiting for." He was quiet for a moment. "What did Miss Rita say?" "Miss Rita is 72 and completely unflappable. She told Lily that eyes ran in families and some coincidences are on purpose." A pause that was almost something like rueful. "I'm surrounded by women who handle things better than I do." You handle things fine." "I'm calling you 9 days later than I said I would. You said you needed time." A brief silence. "Saturday," she said. "There's a park 3 blocks from her school. She goes every Saturday morning if the weather holds. We get there at 10. Another pause. "I'm not promising anything after that. I'm not agreeing to anything. She should know who you are. She should at least know that." "Okay. And Damien." Her voice shifted to something that was purely serious in a way that made him straighten slightly. "If you come on Saturday, and then you disappear, if something comes up with the company or the foundation or whatever else runs your life now, that's it. That's the only chance. I will not put her through the experience of meeting her father and then watching him not show up. I had that experience with my own father, and I will not. I need you to understand that this is not a one-time visit." "I understand." "Do you? Because your schedule is—" "Nora," he paused. "I understand. Saturday, 10 o'clock. I'll be there." She was quiet for a moment, the way she got quiet when she was evaluating something. "The park is called Arbor Green," she said. "It has a climbing structure that she's currently obsessed with. She'll be wearing a yellow jacket." Another pause, shorter. "Don't bring anyone. No staff, no foundation people, no cameras. Just me," he said. "Just you," she said, and hung up. He got to the park at 9:30. He'd intended to arrive at 10. He'd been in his car at 9 and had driven around the block twice before accepting that he was going to arrive early and there wasn't anything to be done about it. He sat on a bench near the entrance with his collar up against the November cold, hands in his pockets, watching a man throw a ball for a dog in the far corner of the park. At 1 minute past 10, he heard the gate. Lily was wearing the yellow jacket. She was also wearing rain boots covered in printed frogs, even though it hadn't rained, and she had her hair in 2 uneven pigtails that gave the impression of having been negotiated rather than simply performed. She was holding Nora's hand and talking without any apparent pause for breath, describing something that had happened involving a frog, which may or may not have been related to the boots. Nora saw him immediately. Lily noticed a moment later mid-sentence. She stopped talking. She looked at him. He stood up from the bench. Lily turned to Nora. "Mama? That's the man from the hospital, the one with my eyes." "I know," Nora said. Her voice was steady. "His name is Damien." Lily looked back at him with the focused attention that 4-year-olds gave things they were genuinely puzzling out. He walked toward them slowly, the way you'd approach something you didn't want to startle, which felt absurd given that it was a 4-year-old on a playground. But he was operating on complete instinct, and instinct said slow. "Hi," he said. He stopped a few feet away. "Lily, right? I think we met briefly at the hospital." "You have my eyes," she said. "We might share them," he agreed. She considered this. "How?" He looked at Nora for exactly a second. Nora gave him nothing. Not permission, not redirection. This was his problem to solve in real time. "Sometimes," he said, crouching down to her level, which felt like the right instinct, Eyes travel through families, like you get your nose from one person and your eyes from another person. And sometimes that happens across a bigger space than you'd expect. Lily processed this. My teacher has a baby and the baby has her nose. Exactly like that. But the baby's dad has a different nose. Right, yes, it can be complicated. Do you know my dad? Lily asked. The question landed with the simple directness of something fired from a very small, very accurate weapon. He held himself very still, looked at Lily's face, which was watching him with complete openness. No guard, no subtext, just the genuine inquiry of a person who wanted an actual answer. Yeah, he said, I do. He paused. I'm him, actually. Lily stared at him. He waited. Behind Lily, Nora had gone very still. Lily turned around and looked at her mother. Mama, is that true? Yes, Nora said quietly. That's true, Bug. Lily turned back to Damien. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that he started to wonder what happened when a 4-year-old's processing concluded and what the output was going to be. You didn't know I was here, Lily said. Not accusatory, factual. The same tone she'd used about the eyes. No, he said. I didn't. I'm sorry about that. But you're here now. I'm here now. She seemed to weigh this, the full arithmetic of it, whatever that looked like from inside a 4-year-old's understanding of time and absence and now. Then she held out the frog boots toward him, which he realized after a second was not a gesture that required interpretation. She wanted help climbing the nearby structure and had identified him as available for the task. Okay, he said. He helped her climb. He gulped. They stayed for 2 hours. Nora sat on the bench and watched. She answered Lily's questions when they came to her, and Lily moved between them in the way children moved, with no apparent awareness of the complicated gravitational field she was orbiting. And she drank the coffee she'd brought in a travel mug and didn't say much, but she didn't leave either. Damien pushed Lily on the swings until his arms were tired. He watched her go down the slide 11 times, each time delivering a detailed verbal assessment of the experience. He failed 3 times at correctly identifying the correct frog on her boot that she insisted was the best frog, which she found both baffling and forgivable. Lily fell down at some point, running the way children fell down, suddenly and completely, without any breaking of the fall. She skinned her palm on the asphalt path. He was closer than Nora was and crouched beside her immediately, and Lily looked at her palm and then at him with a face that was deciding whether this warranted crying. Is it bad? She asked. He looked at it, small scrape. Nothing serious. Nope, pretty minor. Mama says if there's no blood, it's fine. No blood, it's fine. She sniffled once, in a manner that communicated she was choosing not to cry and wanted credit for the choice. Okay. She got up and brushed her other hand against her jacket. I'm going back to the slide. He watched her run off. When he looked up, Nora was watching him from the bench. He walked over and sat down beside her. Not close. The bench was long. He stopped. I know, Nora said. He looked at Lily, who was already climbing. Does she know more than she's showing? She usually knows more than she's showing. She processes things sideways, asks about something else for a few days, and then comes at the real thing later from an angle you didn't see coming. A brief pause. She'll ask you the difficult questions next time. Today was reconnaissance. Next time, he said. Nora was quiet for a moment. She's going to want to know why you weren't here. I've been thinking about how to explain it in a way that's honest without being... She stopped. She's 4. She can hold a lot, but she needs the shape of it to be something she can understand. We can say someone made a mistake, he said, that we didn't have the right information, that it wasn't because of her. He paused. All of that is true. Nora turned and looked at him directly. The someone who made the mistake is your father. I know. She's going to find that out eventually. I know that too. Are you prepared for what that looks like? Because it doesn't end with an apology and moving on. That's something she's going to carry and revisit for years, probably. The fact that someone chose to... Nora stopped herself. He could hear the control in it. I'm not going to talk about Victor right now. It makes me unable to be rational. That's reasonable. It's not rational, though. I need to be rational about this. It can be both. He looked at Lily on the slide. Take the irrational part somewhere private and be rational with me. I can handle the rational version. She looked at him again with the studying expression. You've gotten better at emotional conversations. The bar you're using is very low. Something that was almost a smile crossed her face before she controlled it. I'm being serious. I know. I've had 4 years to practice. He paused. Mostly on myself. It's not great practice, but some. Lily reached the top of the slide and turned around to wave. Both of them lifted a hand automatically. Lily looked satisfied and launched herself down. She's going to want more than Saturdays, Nora said quietly. I know. She's in preschool Monday through Friday. She has a routine. It matters to her. Routines matter to her specifically. She's that kind of kid. What kind? The kind who needs to know what's coming. Who wants the schedule on the wall where she can look at it? A pause. She's not anxious about it. She wants to see the shape of things. He thought about this. I want to learn the schedule, he said. Whatever the schedule is, I want to know it, not to disrupt it, to fit into it. Nora was quiet for a moment. That's a different thing than showing up at a park once. I know what I said about one-time visits. I know you do. I'm making sure you know what the actual alternative looks like. It looks like Tuesday pickups and pediatric checkups and Saturday mornings in a cold park and being present for the disasters, not just the good parts. I understand. She threw up on the way to her last checkup, in my car. She said it without editorial comment. That's what present looks like. I have a car, he said. It can be cleaned. Nora looked at him for a moment longer, then she looked back at the playground. Lily was collecting something off the ground, a stick or a rock, some found object with unclear significance, and examining it with her full attention. She's going to love you, Nora said quietly. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like something she was bracing for. She doesn't do things partially. When she decides someone is hers, it's complete. It's going to happen fast and it's going to be... She stopped. I just need you to understand what it means if it happens and then you're not there. I'll be there. You can't know that. Life doesn't... Nora. He waited until she looked at him. I'm not going to pretend I have a perfect record. I don't. I made choices during our marriage that I should have made differently. I worked when I should have been home. I treated the company like it was the... I know what I did wrong. He paused. But I am telling you clearly that this is the thing I will not get wrong. This one. Whatever else happens. She held his gaze for a long moment. Tuesday pickups, she said finally. I have a double shift on Tuesdays. She gets out at 3:15. Her school is in Lakeview. She pulled out her phone and sent him something. An address, he realized when his phone buzzed. You will be on time. 3:15 exactly. She will be looking. 3:15, he said. I'll be there. And Damien. She stood, pulling her coat together. She doesn't know about what Ashford means. Your company, the money. She knows I'm a doctor, and she knows doctors help people. That's the size of her world right now, and I want to keep it that way for as long as I can. Understood. Just a person, she said. Can you do that? He thought about it honestly. I can try. Try hard, she said, and called Lily off the playground. Oh, Tuesday. He arrived at 3:07 and sat in his car, a car he'd specifically chosen not to make look notable, one of the company vehicles that ran neutral gray without plates that advertised anything, watching the school gate with the focused attention he usually reserved for Q4 projections. At 3:14, a teacher opened the gate and children began emerging in the scattered pattern of freed things. He got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked for Yellow. The yellow jacket appeared 30 seconds later. Lily came through the gate at a walk that was working very hard not to be a run, which meant she'd been told not to run, and was interpreting the instruction with extreme technical literalism. She was carrying a drawing, a large sheet of paper that she was holding out from her body with both hands, as if transporting something important and slightly fragile. She saw him, and the walk became a run immediately, the instruction apparently expiring upon sighting. You came, she said. I said I would. Mama said you would too. She held up the drawing. I made this at school. You can look at it, but it's for Mama. He looked at it. A figure with yellow hair, Nora, he understood, surrounded by smaller figures that might have been people, or might have been other things, with the sun in the corner that children put in the corner of every drawing since probably forever. Who are all the people? He asked. Lily pointed at each one in turn. That's Mama. That's me. That's Miss Rita. That's Mrs. Pemberton, my teacher. That's... She hesitated, pointed at a figure at the edge of the drawing that was clearly a later edition, slightly different crayon pressure. I added that one today? He looked at it. Just a figure, taller than the others. Who's that? He asked. Lily considered the drawing. I'm not sure yet, she said carefully, but I think I know. He looked at her. She looked back at him with his own eyes. He thought about Nora saying she processed things sideways and came at the real thing from an angle you didn't see coming. Okay, he said. Should we get some hot chocolate before I take you to your mom? Yes, she said immediately, but not the kind with the fake marshmallows. The real ones. What are real marshmallows? The big ones. She said it like this was information he should already have. Right, he said. Big ones only. She took his hand in the matter-of-fact way of someone who was cold and had identified a solution, and they walked down the sidewalk and he thought about the figure at the edge of the drawing, the later edition, the one she wasn't sure about yet. He thought he understood suddenly what Nora had meant about the reconnaissance. By the third Tuesday, he knew the names of everyone in Lily's class. He hadn't asked. She'd told him, in a running daily narrative that she delivered with the completeness of a documentary, the full social geography of her world, including who had done what at lunch and whether the library books were due back and what the disagreement with a classmate named Theo had been about and how it had been resolved and what Theo's position had been, which Lily found misguided. He said dogs were better than cats, she said on the third Tuesday. Hot chocolate in both hands at the same coffee shop she'd immediately identified as correct. But we don't have a cat or a dog, so it's not fair to choose. That seems logical. I told him maybe both are good. What did Theo say? He said dogs are still better. She looked at her cup. Theo is very stubborn. How do you deal with stubborn people? Lily thought about it seriously. Wait, she said finally. Just wait. They usually come around. She paused. Mama says that. He thought about that on the drive to drop her at Nora's building. Thought about Nora in the waiting room saying, I need time. Thought about 9 days, which had felt like a long time, and now felt like almost nothing. Nora was in the lobby when he brought Lily up, off shift early, still in her hospital badge, looking like someone who'd been running at high speed for 10 hours and had another 2 to go. Lily launched herself immediately, and Nora caught her and held her in the specific way that told him it wasn't habit, or wasn't only habit, but was also need. Nora needed this at the end of the day as much as Lily did. Good day? Nora asked her. Theo is wrong about dogs, Lily reported, but otherwise, yes. Nora looked over Lily's head at Damien, a question that wasn't quite a question. No disasters, he said. Real marshmallows. She told me about the entire social structure of Lakeview Preschool. Only some of it, Lily corrected. There's more? A lot more. She said it solemnly. I'll tell you Tuesday. He looked at Nora. Something shifted between them. Not large, not resolved, but something. A small opening, the kind you didn't remark on because remarking on it would make it close again. Tuesday, Nora said. It was addressed to Lily, but she was looking at him. So, Tuesday, he said. He left them in the lobby, Lily still talking about Theo as Nora carried her toward the elevator. He went back to his car and sat there for a moment before starting it. The drawing Lily had made for Nora had the figure at the edge, the later edition, the one she wasn't sure about yet. He thought he knew what she was working up to. He thought he'd wait. Just wait. They usually come around. He started the car and pulled out into Chicago traffic and thought about how a 4-year-old had apparently figured out the most essential thing in approximately 3 Tuesdays. Gretchen called him on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week. I have the documents, she said. He was in his apartment. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd stood making that first call to his father, and listened while Gretchen walked him through it. She was precise and thorough, and she didn't editorialize. She stated findings the way Nora stated medical facts, without decorative language, letting the information carry its own weight. The weight was considerable, forged letters. A fabricated correspondence dated 2 weeks after the separation, purportedly from Nora's attorney, stating that she had terminated the pregnancy and wished no further contact with Damien or any member of the Ashford family. The signature on the letter had been carefully replicated, but the paper stock was wrong, a detail that had apparently not seemed like a risk worth worrying about at the time. Intercepted communications. 3 letters that Nora had sent to a general legal contact and that had been rerouted to Victor's office before reaching anyone else. One of those letters mentioned the pregnancy in terms that made its existence unmistakable. A payment, routed through a subsidiary, to a firm that specialized in what the internal documentation described as investigative consultation. But the timeline of this payment corresponded exactly to the weeks during which Nora would have been trying to make contact. There were other things. Smaller, worse, in some ways because they were smaller. Damien sat at the kitchen table and listened and didn't say anything until Gretchen finished. "Is it enough?" he asked. "For a criminal referral?" "Probably." "For a civil case, certainly." Gretchen paused. "What do you want to do with it?" He'd been thinking about what he wanted to do with it since the morning after the hospital, not in detail. He hadn't had the detail yet, but in direction. He'd known the direction for weeks. "Send everything to an independent attorney," he said. "Not connected to the company. I want a second assessment." "And your father?" He thought about Victor on the phone, saying, "I was protecting you," with the calm certainty of a man who had never once questioned his own authority to make decisions about other people's lives. "I'll deal with my father," he said, "after the assessment." After he hung up, he sat at the table for another few minutes. Then he took out his phone and typed a message to Nora. "Gretchen has documentation. I want to share it with you when you're ready. There's no urgency. Take your time." Her response came 40 minutes later. "Tomorrow. Lily is with my sister. Come at 7. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he put his phone down and thought about a document forged in his father's office while Nora was somewhere in this city, alone, finding out she was pregnant, trying to reach him. He sat with that for a long time. The November cold pressed against the apartment windows. He sat with it. Nora's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Lincoln Park that was nice without being extravagant. The kind of place a trauma surgeon chose when she was making real money for the first time in her life and had a 4-year-old and no interest in impressing anyone. The lobby had a doorman who clearly knew her and clearly was assessing Damien with the particular attention of someone who had been watching out for a woman and a small child for a while and had opinions about men who showed up at 7 in the evening. Damien did not take this personally. She buzzed him up without coming to the lobby, which he understood as a boundary and respected. The apartment was exactly what he'd have predicted, and nothing like what he'd expected. There were drawings on the refrigerator, Lily's recognizable by the style, which had a specific confident wrongness to it that was entirely consistent. A pair of rain boots by the door, a stethoscope on the kitchen counter beside a half-drunk cup of tea that had clearly been forgotten. Medical journals stacked on the coffee table alongside a picture book about ocean creatures, and a single small sneaker whose pair was nowhere visible. Nora had changed out of her hospital clothes into jeans and a sweater that looked like it had been washed approximately 400 times. She looked tired in the way she always looked tired, not defeated, just running at a deficit that she'd made her permanent operating condition. She'd made coffee. She set a mug in front of him at the kitchen table without asking how he took it, which meant she remembered, which he chose not to comment on. He set the folder on the table. She didn't touch it immediately. She sat across from him with her own coffee and looked at it. "Gretchen prepared a summary," he said. 3 pages. The full documentation is behind it." "How bad?" He thought about the right word. "Deliberate," he said. All of it was deliberate. Nora nodded, once, slowly, like she'd known this but had needed to hear it confirmed by something other than her own reasoning. She reached out and opened the folder. He watched her read. Nora Callahan read the way she did everything, completely, without interruption, processing as she went. She didn't make sounds. Her face did things, small, controlled things, and he tracked them without meaning to. There was a moment around the second page where her jaw tightened and her breathing changed slightly, and he thought about saying something and decided against it. She didn't need commentary. She needed the space to read. She finished the summary and then paged through the documentation behind it. Not reading every word, assessing, the way she'd assess a chart, looking for the architecture of it. She closed the folder, put both hands flat on the table, looked at the wall above his shoulder for a moment. "He intercepted my letters," she said. "Yes. I wrote to you." Her voice was very controlled. I wrote 3 times, Damien, through the legal contact because your personal number was dead. I told them I was pregnant. I asked..." She stopped. "I asked to talk to you directly. I said I understood if the marriage was over, but I needed to talk to you about the baby, about what we were going to do together." "I know. I thought..." She stopped again, started differently. "When I didn't hear back, I thought that was the answer. I thought you'd gotten them, and that was the answer. My father made sure I never saw them. I know that now." She looked back at him. "How did you not..." She stopped herself. He watched her stop herself. "Sorry, I'm not..." "That's not a fair question." "It's a fair question. I was in bad shape. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I trusted my father to handle the legal process because He paused. "Because I was trying not to fall apart, and he was very good at being the calm one. He's very good at a lot of things." "Yes." She stood up from the table, walked to the kitchen and stood there for a moment with her back to him, and he let her. She turned the faucet on and off, which was a thing people did when they needed to do something with their hands. "When Lily was born," Nora said to the kitchen window, "I was alone. My sister was there, but I was alone in the way that matters. And I thought about calling you. I thought about it seriously. I had your foundation's public number." She turned around, leaned against the counter. "But your father had told me so clearly that you didn't want..." And I thought calling him now I thought it would look like I was doing it for money, for the name. Something moved through her expression. "And I wasn't going to let anyone think that about my daughter. I wasn't going to let her be something someone could accuse me of using." "Nora, so I didn't call." She folded her arms. "And I built it from scratch. And it was hard, Damien. I'm not going to perform how hard it was for you. But it was genuinely very hard. Double shifts in the first year because the resident stipend was..." She shook her head. "I slept in the resident lounge twice a week. Miss Rita is worth more than I can pay her. There were months where I was running the math on groceries." He sat with that. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," she said. "I know. I'm telling you so you understand what it cost, what your father's decision cost." She pushed off from the counter and came back to the table but didn't sit. "And I need you to understand that I am..." She searched for the word. "I am catastrophically angry about this. I'm managing it because being unmanaged doesn't help Lily, but underneath the management I am..." "Furious," he said. "Furious," she agreed, at him, and at the situation, and at myself for not pushing harder, for believing what I was told, for not..." She sat down. "For not doing the thing I would have told any patient to do, which is get a second opinion." "We both could have done more," he said. "We were both dealt the same lie." "We were dealt the lie differently." "Yes." He didn't argue that. It was true, and there was no useful version of arguing it. "The way forward matters more to me than who was handed the worse version, but I know the difference, and I'm not pretending otherwise." She looked at him. "What are you going to do about Victor?" He'd thought about this, had been thinking about it since Gretchen's call, had turned it over carefully and tried to separate the personal response from the strategic, from the simply correct one. "There's going to be a criminal referral," he said. "Gretchen's second opinion attorney agrees. The document forgery alone is enough. Potentially the intercepted communications, depending on the statutes." He paused. "I'm not driving it. I've handed it to independent counsel, but I'm not stopping it either." Nora was quiet. "He's your father," she said. "He's also the person who decided my daughter didn't exist, and that you could be..." He didn't finish it. "Yes, he's my father." She was quiet for another moment. "I'm not asking you to do anything differently. I just wanted to know where you were on it." "Now you know." "Yeah." She looked at the folder. "What about the board, the company?" "That's a different problem. There are going to be questions. I'd rather answer them directly than let the story find its own shape." He paused. There's going to be a shareholders meeting in 8 weeks. I've been thinking about using it. Her eyes came up. I know how that sounds, he said. It sounds like a public spectacle. It's going to be a spectacle regardless. The question is whether I shape it or it shapes itself. He held her gaze. And I'm not doing it for the optics. I want to be completely clear about that. I'm doing it because he used the company's infrastructure to do this. Subsidiary payments, legal routing, communications channels. The board has a right to know that the man who co-founded the company used those resources to... I understand, she said quietly. I do. She looked at the folder again. Lily is going to find this out eventually. I want to think about how she finds it out. I know. I don't want her to see it on a news ticker. No. That's part of why I wanted to talk to you before I did anything. This involves you and it involves her. You should have input on the shape of it. Nora sat with her hands around her coffee mug, looking at nothing specific. There was a long silence that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but had weight to it. He really never lost a night's sleep, she said. Not a question. Probably not, Damien said. That's the part I keep coming back to. She shook her head. Not even the act. The easiness of it. Like we were variables he adjusted. We were, to him. Well, she sat back. He miscalculated the output. Something passed between them at that. Not quite a shared moment, but the acknowledgement of one. They'd been two people who'd been variables in someone else's calculation, and the calculation had been wrong, and sitting in her kitchen in Lincoln Park with Lily's drawings on the refrigerator and the folder of evidence between them, the wrongness of it was very clear, and also, somehow, beside the point of what was currently true. She drew you, Nora said. He looked up. A week ago. She made another drawing. She makes about 40 drawings a week. They're everywhere. She gestured vaguely at the refrigerator and the rest of the apartment, confirming this. But she made one and labeled it. She labeled all the figures, which she's been learning in school, how to write the first letter of names. Nora got up and went to the refrigerator. She unpinned something and brought it back. The drawing had figures with letters beside them. M for Mama, L for Lily, R for Miss Rita. And at the edge, where the earlier drawing had had the unlabeled addition, a figure with the letter D beside it. He held the paper carefully. She didn't show me, Nora said. Miss Rita told me. She made it at home one afternoon, and she put it in her backpack, and she showed Miss Rita, and she said it was a picture of her family. A pause. Miss Rita told me later, quietly. She said she didn't want to make a big thing of it. He looked at the figure with the D beside it. She decided, he said. She decided. Nora sat back down. 3 Tuesdays, that's how long it took her. Something in her voice that was many things at once. The mother who'd worried, the woman who'd been alone, the person who was still angry at everything that had led to this kitchen table. She's faster at things than I am. Maybe she has less history to work through. Maybe. Nora took the drawing back carefully and went and repinned it. Standing at the refrigerator, her back to him, she said, I don't know where this goes, Damien. Between you and me, I can't see that far right now. The only thing I can see clearly is Lily and what's good for her. That's enough right now, he said. She turned around. Don't say that if you don't mean it. I mean it. He paused. I'm not going to tell you that I don't, that there's nothing there for me. I won't insult you by pretending the last 8 weeks have been purely logistical. He held her gaze. But I also understand that 4 years happened and you built a life, and that life doesn't stop being yours because I've shown up with documentation. He paused. Lily first. That's not a line. That's just true. She looked at him for a moment. Coffee's getting cold, she said. Yeah. They sat at her kitchen table for another hour, not talking about the folder or Victor or the shareholders meeting. She asked about the foundation, the actual work, not the public face of it. And he told her about the diagnostic program rollout in 3 rural hospital systems. And she had opinions because she always had opinions about medical technology. And those opinions were specific and useful. And he found himself taking out his phone and sending a voice memo to himself mid-conversation. And she noticed and asked what he was doing. And he said, remembering something you just said about lag time in the interface. And she looked briefly caught off guard by that, by being taken seriously in her area. And he thought about the conference in San Francisco, and the woman with the notebook and the Q&A, and how that had been the beginning of everything, and how strange it was to be at a kitchen table in Lincoln Park with it. He left at 9:30. At the door she said, "Tuesday." 3:15, he confirmed. A pause. "There's a parent-teacher thing on the 14th, in the morning. I'm supposed to bring someone or go alone." She said it to the doorframe, not him. 8:30. He looked at her. She was looking at the doorframe. "I'll be there," he said. She nodded once. "Okay," and closed the door. December arrived, and Lily decided that Damien needed to understand several things about the holiday season that she felt he was possibly unclear on. These included the correct ratio of ornaments to tree branches, the difference between acceptable and unacceptable wrapping paper patterns, and the precise specifications of what constituted a proper cup of hot chocolate, which she had clearly been refining as a philosophy since approximately age 2. She had also, without announcement, stopped calling him Damien. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the park, when he arrived at the school gate and she came through at her usual velocity and said, "You're on time," with the approval of someone who had set the standard and was monitoring compliance. And then she took his hand and said, "Can we go to the hot chocolate place?" "Of course." "And then can I show you the thing I made?" "What thing?" "The thing at school. It's a project. I painted it." "I'd like to see it." She considered this. "It's not finished yet, so you have to understand that." "I'll keep that in mind." "Okay," she said, and then, "Can we call Mama and see if she can come after?" "Sure, if she's not working." "She's always working," Lily said with the matter-of-fact melancholy of someone who had made peace with a fundamental fact of their world. Then, "But sometimes she comes after." He called Nora from the coffee shop. She answered on the third ring, sounding like she was in the middle of something. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Lily wants to know if you can come after your shift." A pause. "After when?" He looked at Lily. "How long is the project?" "I don't know. A while. There's a lot to show." She was very serious about this. "She says there's a lot to show," he relayed. He heard Nora exhale something that was approximately a laugh. "I'll try. I can't promise." "That's fine." "Damien." A pause. "Is she okay?" "She's great. She's giving me very detailed instruction about hot chocolate." "The marshmallow thing?" "The marshmallow thing, yes." Another half laugh. "Okay, I'll try to come." She came at 5:30, still in her hospital badge, and Lily had spent the intervening 2 hours showing him the project. A papier-mâché animal she was calling a striped horse, which he carefully did not identify as a zebra because she'd named it herself, and the name was Raymond, and describing in minute detail the classroom dynamics of the past week and asking him 3 times if he liked Raymond, which he affirmed each time with increasing specificity until she was satisfied. When Nora arrived, she stopped in the doorway of the coffee shop and looked at the scene, Lily at the table with Raymond between them, Damien holding the animal while Lily pointed out structural features of note, and something passed across Nora's face that she closed off quickly. "Raymond," Lily said, "come and show Mama Raymond." "I see Raymond," Nora said, sitting down and accepting the animal. "Raymond is very nice." "I know." Lily leaned against Nora's arm. "He said I did a good job on the stripes." "He's right." "I know." She yawned with her whole body. "I'm tired." "I know, Bug." Lily looked between them for a moment, with the specific attention she used when she was assembling information. Then she looked at Damien and said very simply, "Are you going to keep coming on Tuesdays?" "Yes," he said. "And Saturdays?" "And Saturdays." She nodded, leaned back against Nora, closed her eyes briefly in a way that suggested she was conserving energy for later. "Okay," she said. "Then you can be Dad." The coffee shop continued being a coffee shop. Cups were lifted and set down around them. Someone at the counter was asking about a flavor of syrup. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday evening was operating entirely normally. Damien looked at Nora. Nora was looking at Lily, who had closed her eyes all the way now and was in that rapid decline state of 4-year-old exhaustion that went from fully operational to nearly asleep in under 4 minutes. When Nora looked up, her eyes were too bright and she blinked once, decisively, the way someone did when they were refusing to do something in public. "She means it," Nora said quietly. "I know," he said. But the shareholders' meeting was on January 15th. Damien had given the board a formal notification 3 days before, which was within legal requirements and deliberately at the short end of them. Not to be cruel, to limit the amount of time available for his father to respond strategically, to line up defenses, to prepare the kind of managed narrative that Victor Ashford was extraordinarily gifted at preparing. He'd told Nora the night before, not to ask permission. He wasn't asking permission. He'd been clear about that. But because he'd told her he would, and he was trying to be the kind of person who said things and then did them. "How are you feeling about it?" she'd asked on the phone. "Necessary," he'd said. "That's not the same as feeling good about it." "No, it's not." He paused. "He's still my father. I want to be honest about that. It doesn't change what has to happen, but there's no version of this that isn't complicated." She'd been quiet for a moment. "I know, for what it's worth, I don't want you to pretend it's simple." "I know you don't." "Be careful tomorrow," she'd said. Not exactly warmth, but something in the vicinity. The meeting was at 9 a.m. The boardroom of Ashford Medical Technologies on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a January Chicago that was gray and brutally cold, the lake invisible under overcast. 47 board members, senior executives, and major shareholders arranged in the room's formal configuration, most of them aware that something was happening but uncertain of the shape. Victor was seated 3 chairs to Damien's left. He'd had 3 days, and he'd used them. He was composed and correctly dressed, and he'd clearly made some calls because 2 of the oldest board members were watching Damien with the careful neutrality of people who'd been briefed. Damien let the standard proceedings run through their course. Financial report, foundation updates. The diagnostic program metrics that Nora had helped him think about differently, though she didn't know that yet. Then he said, "There's a matter I need to bring to this board directly. It concerns the personal conduct of the co-founder, and it involves the misuse of company resources." The room changed quality immediately. He went through it. Not with performance, not with the drama his communications team would have staged if he'd let them near it. He went through it the way Gretchen had presented it to him, factually, sequentially, letting the architecture of it do the work. The document forgery, the intercepted letters, the subsidiary payment, the timeline. He didn't look at his father while he was speaking. When he finished, there was a silence in the room that had texture. Victor said, "You are making serious allegations about your own family in a corporate forum." "I'm making factual disclosures about the misuse of company resources," Damien said. "The relationship to my family is what makes this the hardest thing I've done in this room. It doesn't change that it has to be done." "You have a daughter," Victor said. His voice had shifted, not quite an appeal, but in that direction. "Who just met you? Think about what this does to her world." "What it does to her world," Damien said, "is demonstrate that when someone uses lies and forged documents to harm people she loves, the truth comes out. That's what I want her to understand." Victor said nothing. A board member near the end of the table, a woman named Stern, who'd been on the board for 12 years and who Damien had always respected, said, "Mr. Ashford, you're recommending criminal referral?" "I'm recommending the board authorize independent legal counsel to assess the findings and proceed as warranted, yes. And you understand the reputational implications for the company?" "I do. I also understand that allowing this to remain buried is a worse reputational risk if it surfaces elsewhere." He paused. "I would rather this board know the truth from me than from a journalist." Another silence. Victor stood up. He was 73 years old, and he was still a physically imposing man, still someone whose posture communicated the certainty of a person who'd never had a room disagree with him. He looked at Damien across the table. "I built this company," he said. "I built it from nothing, everything you have. The foundation, the technology, the name that opens every door you've walked through, came from the choices I made." "I know that," Damien said. "And this is how you—" "Dad." The word was quiet, not cruel. "What you built is real, and I know what it cost. And what you did to Nora and to my daughter, is also real. Both of those things are true at the same time. He held his father's gaze. I'm not erasing what you built. I'm holding you accountable for what you did. Those are different things. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his leather portfolio and he walked out of the boardroom. The room was very quiet. Stern said, I'll move to authorize independent counsel. The vote was 39-8. Victor resigned 6 days later. The statement was brief and cited health reasons, which was the language of a man who'd decided that dignified exit served him better than fighting a process he couldn't control. There would be more to come. The criminal referral was proceeding slowly through independent counsel. But the resignation was the thing that made the news. Damien was in his car when the notification came through. He read the headline and put his phone away and drove in silence for a while. He didn't feel satisfied, which he'd expected. He felt the specific weight of a thing concluded that shouldn't have needed concluding, the grief of a wrong that should never have needed to be made right. He called Nora. It's done, he said. A pause. I know. I saw the headline. Another pause. Are you okay? Working on it. That's honest. Trying to be. He turned at a light. Lily's school does a winter performance at the end of the month. She mentioned it approximately 16 times last Tuesday. She mentioned it to me 700 times, Nora said. She's playing a snowflake. The costume involves tinsel. She told me it's the most important role. She has told every single person she knows that it's the most important role, including the woman at the dry cleaner. He almost laughed. Can I come? A brief pause. She'd be devastated if you didn't. Then I'll be there. Another pause, different from the others, softer around the edges. Damien. Her voice was careful. What your father said at the meeting about what you have, what came from his choices, do you... She stopped. Is that something you're sitting with? He thought about it honestly. Some, he said, not the way he meant it. How do you mean it? I mean, there are things he built that were real, and there are things I built with them that are also real. And there are things he destroyed, and I'm trying to... He paused. I'm trying to build something with those too. From what's left. She was quiet for a moment. The snowflake costume has real tinsel, she said. She might blind the entire audience. I'll sit in the back. You'll sit with me in the middle because she needs to be able to see us. A pause. I'll save you a seat. He said, thank you. She said, it's a plastic chair in a school gymnasium. Don't thank me too much. She hung up. He drove through Chicago in January. Ugly winter, real winter, the city stripped down to its functional bones with no prettiness to soften it, and thought about a little girl in a tinsel snowflake costume who had handed him a name on a Tuesday without fanfare and expected nothing in return except that he show up. He was going to show up. He was going to show up for every plastic chair in every school gymnasium for as long as she'd let him. Outside, the city was cold and gray and completely indifferent, the way cities were. And somewhere in Lincoln Park, Nora was probably putting Lily to bed and correcting the angle of some stuffed animal and running through tomorrow's schedule in her head while simultaneously managing the anger that she was still carrying, because she was a person and not a symbol, and the anger was fair, and it had nowhere to go yet except forward. And at the edge of a drawing on a refrigerator, a figure with the letter D beside it was part of a family. Damien drove home. January was cold and long, and nothing about any of it was easy, but he was beginning to understand that easy had never really been the point. The winter performance was on a Thursday evening in the last week of January, in a school gymnasium that smelled like industrial cleaner and old sneakers and was decorated with paper snowflakes that the children had made themselves, each one slightly irregular in the way that handmade things were irregular, hung from the ceiling at different heights, as if someone had thrown them up there and let physics decide. Damien arrived 8 minutes early. Nora was already there, in the fourth row center, with her coat across the seat beside her. She looked up when he came in and moved the coat without comment, which he understood as the closest thing to a welcome the plastic gymnasium chair situation was going to generate. He sat down. The seat was exactly as uncomfortable as she'd warned. Around them, parents were filling in with the particular energy of people who had come from work and hadn't quite made the transition. Men with loosened ties, women checking phones one last time before putting them away. A grandfather in the front row with a video camera that was at least 10 years old who had positioned himself with professional seriousness. "She's been up since 5:30, Nora said. "Excited?" She reorganized her dresser at 6 a.m. She said she needed to think clearly, and she thinks clearly when things are in order. He looked at her. "She's 4. She's been 4 for 7 months. She's running out of patience with it." Nora pulled her coat into her lap. "She told Miss Rita that 5 is when things get serious." "What things?" She wasn't specific. "I didn't push it." A pause. "She asked this morning if you were coming." "What did you tell her?" "I told her yes." She smoothed the coat across her knees. She said, "I know. He said he would. Like that settled it." She paused. "She trusts you." He didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't be inadequate. The lights went down. A teacher with a microphone and the brave energy of someone who had done this many times spoke briefly about the children's hard work, and then the music started. Something seasonal, slightly off-tempo, because the recording was being played through a speaker that had seen better decades. And the children filed in from the side door in their costumes. Lily was in the second group. She was wearing white with silver tinsel at the edges, and she had glitter somewhere on her face that had spread from wherever it had started. She came out scanning the audience with a focus that was not subtle, and when she found them, 4th row, center, both of them, her face did something that he was entirely unprepared for. Not a wave. Not the big theatrical gesture of a child performing finding her parents in the audience. Just a small, certain nod, like checking something off a list. Both of them were here. That was what needed to be confirmed. Confirmed. He felt Nora exhale slightly beside him. The performance lasted 22 minutes and involved a narrative about seasons that the children moved through in groups, each group representing something: snowflakes, raindrops, flowers, leaves. And Lily performed her snowflake responsibilities with total commitment and no apparent awareness that the tinsel was now in her hair as well as her costume. She did not look at the audience again until the bow at the end, when she looked directly at them and gave a second nod that was even more decisive than the first. Afterward, in the hallway, she found them immediately and launched herself at Damien first. A decision that he suspected was a 4-year-old's experiment in fairness, since she always went to Nora first, and said into his shoulder, "I did the arms right." "You did every arm perfectly," he said. "I practiced on Miss Rita." It showed." She pulled back and looked at him seriously. "Did you see the part where I went left?" "The left turn, yes." "That was the hardest part." She seemed satisfied that he'd identified this. Then she turned to Nora, and the whole process repeated at a volume several notches higher. They took her to dinner after. A diner 2 blocks from the school that she'd chosen because it had milkshakes with cherries. And she ate approximately 40% of her grilled cheese and spent the rest of the meal giving a post-performance analysis that was detailed enough to suggest a future in sports broadcasting. Damien ate his burger and watched her and thought about 5 a.m. and the dresser reorganization, and the child who needed things in order to think clearly, and thought about all the Tuesday mornings that had existed before he was in them. All the small rituals of her life that had been built without him and were running fine without him, and that he was now, carefully and imperfectly, being allowed to be adjacent to. At the end of the diner, Lily fell asleep in the booth, with her head on Nora's arm, the milkshake half finished, and they sat there for a few minutes without moving because neither of them wanted to disturb the logistics of it. The diner was quiet, midweek, late January, a few other tables occupied. "She did great," he said. "She always does." Nora's voice was quiet, calibrated to not wake Lily. "She commits to things completely. Sometimes it's exhausting, honestly, but she's never half in." He looked at Lily's sleeping face, the smear of glitter still on her cheek. "I know where she gets that." Nora looked at him. "You," he said. "The algorithm presentation, the 18 hours in the trauma bay." She was quiet for a moment. "You get it too. In your own way." "I get stubborn," he said. "It's not the same thing." "Sometimes it is." She looked back at Lily. "She asked me last week why I became a doctor. I told her because people needed help and I was good at helping. She thought about it for a while and then she said that was a good enough reason." A pause. "She said she was going to be a painter and a veterinarian and also maybe run a hot chocolate shop. That's a full life." She's got it figured out. Something in Nora's face softened for a moment, genuinely, the way it did sometimes when she was tired enough that maintaining the distance was more work than it was worth. I don't know how she got to be who she is. I know I was there for all of it, but I still don't entirely understand it. You did something right. I did a lot of things wrong too. She said it plainly, without drama. There were months where I was so tired I was barely present, where I'd pick her up from Miss Rita's and put her in the bath and run through the whole bedtime routine, and she'd be asleep, and I'd realize I hadn't actually seen her. I'd been moving through the motions. She paused. She never called me on it. She'd find a way to get my attention. Draw something and put it in front of my face, or say something so specific and strange that I'd have to come back. She brought you lunch, he said, in the middle of a mass casualty event with a handmade box. Nora almost smiled. Yeah, she did. She looked at her sleeping daughter. She decided very early that if she needed me, she was going to come find me. Smart. Terrifying, Nora said, but there was something warm behind it. Lily stirred slightly, didn't wake. They sat in the diner a little longer than they needed to, and neither of them mentioned it. February brought ice storms and a stretch of gray that pressed down on the city for 2 weeks without lifting. Damien kept the Tuesdays and the Saturdays and added a Wednesday pickup when Nora had back-to-back shifts that ran late. He learned the geography of Lily's world the way you learned a new city. First the major landmarks, then the smaller ones, then the shortcuts and the places that mattered for reasons that weren't immediately obvious. He learned that the bench on the east side of Arbor Green was her preferred bench because you could see both the climbing structure and the gate from it, and Lily liked to have sight lines on arrivals and exits. He learned that she would eat approximately anything if it was presented in a small container she could carry herself, and almost nothing if it was put on a plate in front of her without ceremony. He learned that she had strong opinions about story endings and would reject a book mid-read if she felt the ending was coming out wrong, putting it down and saying, "That's not how it should go," with complete authority. He started keeping notes, not on his phone, which felt too clinical. In a small notebook he bought at a drugstore, the kind with a green cover and college-ruled pages. He wasn't sure why he was keeping them. He didn't review them often. It was more the act of writing things down, the physical commitment of putting ink on paper, that felt important. He wrote things like, "She counts steps on staircases without realizing she's doing it and dislikes the sound of plastic bags, specific aversion, not general noise sensitivity. And when she's thinking hard, she goes very quiet and moves her mouth slightly, like she's rehearsing something." Nora found the notebook on his passenger seat one Saturday when she came to meet him at the park, the day he'd driven them all from somewhere else, and she'd gotten in his car. She picked it up without asking, because Nora had never been someone who asked before reading things she'd noticed. She read 2 entries. Put it back. She didn't say anything about it. He didn't say anything about her reading it. But something shifted again, a small increment, and they both felt it and both chose not to examine it directly, the way you chose not to look directly at something you were afraid would move if you did. The call came on a Tuesday night in the 3rd week of February. He was in the office, genuinely in the office, at his desk, reviewing the Foundation's Q1 infrastructure plan, which he'd been putting off because Nora had identified a gap in the rural outreach data that he hadn't wanted to see and now couldn't unsee. His phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize, which he would normally have let go to voicemail, but something, he couldn't have said what, made him pick up. "Mr. Ashford." A man's voice, professional, tightly controlled. "This is Captain Mark Delaney, Illinois Air Medical Response. I'm calling regarding Dr. Nora Callahan." Everything in Damien's body reconfigured itself in approximately 2 seconds. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. "Dr. Callahan volunteered for an air medical rescue operation this evening. A medical transport helicopter went down in the storm system approximately 40 miles northwest of the city. There were 2 pediatric patients on board, critical condition." A pause. "Dr. Callahan was part of the secondary rescue team. There's been a complication at the site." "What kind of complication?" "The wreckage is unstable. She's in the structure with the patients. She stayed with them when part of the frame shifted. We're working on extraction." He was already standing, coat in his hand, without remembering picking it up. "Is she injured?" A pause that told him more than the words that followed. We believe so. We're assessing from outside. She's responsive. She's been communicating with the team. We have 2 pediatric surgeons on site, but we can't move the children until the structure is stabilized. I'm coming out there, he said. Mr. Ashford, the site is restricted. I have an aviation division, he said. I have heavy lift capability and structural assessment equipment. You want me on site? He was already in the elevator. Tell me the coordinates. There was a brief silence, and then Delaney gave him the coordinates. He called his operations director on the way down in the elevator, called the aviation head while crossing the lobby, called Nora's sister Dana, who was with Lily, and told her to stay with Lily and not say anything yet. And when Dana's voice went tight with fear, he said, "She's communicating. She's responsive. I'm going to her. Stay with Lily." And Dana said okay the way people said okay when it was the only word available. He drove to the company airfield. The storm that had caused the crash was still running, stripped down to freezing rain and wind that pushed horizontally, the kind of weather that made every surface treacherous. His aviation team was already mobilizing. He'd given them 12 minutes' notice, and they'd used all 12 of them. And when he landed at the field near the crash site, there were already 3 emergency response trucks there, and lighting being set up, and the particular organized density of a professional rescue operation. Delaney met him at the perimeter. A man in his 50s with the build and face of someone who had been doing this job for a long time and had made peace with what it looked like. "She's still communicating," Delaney said immediately. "She's got the second child braced with her left arm, and she's monitoring the first with her right. She won't move until the children are out." "Of course she won't," Damien said. "We've been telling her the structure is—" "I know what you've been telling her." He looked at the wreckage, which was lit up now by the portable lighting his team had set up alongside the emergency service lights. Twisted metal and composite material from a medical helicopter that had come down in a field at the edge of a tree line, the impact point clear in the frozen ground, the debris field spread in a direction that told you something about the physics. He looked at the part of the structure that was still roughly intact, where the lighting cast shadows that moved. "I need to talk to her." Delaney handed him a radio. "Nora." He pressed the transmit button. His voice came out even. He made it come out even. A pause. Static. Then, "Damien." Her voice was strained in a way that told him something about her physical condition, the specific effort in it. But it was her voice unmistakably. "I'm outside," he said. "I know, Delaney told me." A pause, a breath. "The children are stable. The boy, he's 7. His stats dropped 20 minutes ago, and I've been managing it manually. I need to keep my hands on him." "How bad are you hurt?" A pause. "Nora." "Left shoulder. Something shifted when the frame moved. I think it might be—" She stopped. "It's manageable." "It's dislocated," he said. "Probably. And you've been holding a child in place with it." He wasn't going to hold himself in place. He pressed his lips together for a moment, looked at the structure, at the structural assessment team his aviation people had brought, who were already working, 2 of them with equipment he recognized as load-bearing analysis tools. "I'm going to talk to the structural team," he said. "I need 5 minutes." "Take your time," she said, with the specific dry quality she deployed when she was in pain and refusing to discuss it. "Nora." He paused. "You did the right thing staying with them." A pause on her end. "Tell me something I don't know." "You're also making me significantly more gray-haired." Another pause. Something that might have been a breath that was also slightly a laugh. "You can afford good hair products." He handed the radio back to Delaney and went to his structural team. The assessment took 7 minutes. It was 7 of the longer minutes of his adult life, standing in freezing rain, looking at a mass of crumpled metal, while his team ran their analysis, talking to Delaney's people, looking at load distribution and failure points and the specific geometry of how the thing was balanced. He was not a structural engineer, but he'd spent enough time with engineering teams to understand what he was being told. And what he was being told was that there was a way through, but it required removing a specific section of frame that was currently bearing load in the wrong direction. His team had the equipment. He said, "Do it." He went back to the perimeter and picked up the radio. "Nora." "Still here." We're going to run a cable from the northwest section and relieve the load on the main frame. It's going to shift. I need you to brace. The team comes in immediately after the shift, 30 seconds maximum. They're ready." He paused. "Trust me." A silence. "Okay," she said. He did not step back from the perimeter. He was aware that protocol said he should stay back. He was also aware that he was not going to stay back, and that nobody with any operational sense was going to try to make him. The cable went on. The structural team ran the tension slowly, carefully, with the precision of people who understood that too fast meant collapse. He watched the frame. He kept the radio in his hand. There was a sound, metal under load, the complaint of it, and then a shift that was controlled, mostly controlled, a settling rather than a collapse. The emergency team went in immediately. He watched them go in and stood at the perimeter counting. 22 seconds later, the first child came out. At 38 seconds, the second child came out. At 45 seconds, Nora came out, being supported on one side by a paramedic because her left arm was at an angle that confirmed what she'd said about the shoulder. She was moving on her own feet, which meant something. She was covered in debris dust, and her face had a cut over the left eyebrow that was bleeding into her eye, which she was blinking against with the focused irritation of someone who found the bleeding inconvenient. She saw him at the perimeter. He moved toward her at the same moment she tried to take a step that wasn't quite right, and he caught her arm, her right arm, carefully, and she didn't pull back, which was the most complete thing she could have communicated. "Both kids?" she asked. "Both out. Team is with them. The boys' stats. They'll handle it. Stop." He looked at her face, at the cut, the dust, the shoulder. "Come sit down." "I'm fine." "You have a dislocated shoulder." "I know what I have." She blinked blood out of her eye again. "I need to check on Nora." He put his hand against the side of her face, the uncut side, because she needed to stop moving, and she wasn't going to stop moving unless he gave her somewhere to look. She looked at him. "Both children are out. There are people handling them. You did everything. You can stop now." She looked at him for a moment. Then, very slowly, something that had been held at extreme tension for an unknown number of hours began to come down. "Okay," she said. Her voice was different. "Okay." He walked her to where the paramedic crew was set up. She led him. "Tamad." She had the dislocated shoulder reduced at the site, a process that made him have to look at something else briefly. Not because he couldn't handle it, but because watching her face during it was something he needed to not be watching. And she had 4 stitches on the eyebrow cut, and a probable bruised rib from the frame shift and a bruise on her left thigh that she described as cosmetic. She refused transport to the hospital until she'd confirmed, directly and verbally, the current status of both children from the attending pediatric physician on scene. Both were critical but stable. The 7-year-old stats had recovered after Nora's intervention and were holding. After she got the confirmation, she sat down on a tailgate with a blanket someone had given her and accepted a cup of coffee. She probably wasn't going to drink and looked at the wreckage and the lights. He sat beside her. They didn't talk for a few minutes. "I knew it was unstable," she said finally. "I know. I knew when I went in." "I know." He paused. "Was there a version where you didn't?" She thought about it, shook her head. "No. I know that too." She turned her head and looked at him. The 4 stitches were covered with a wound closure strip. The eye that had been bleeding was clear now, just slightly reddened at the lid. She looked exhausted in a way that went past what he'd seen in the trauma corridor, past the 9 days of waiting tiredness, deeper than any of it. "Lily," she said. "Dana's with her. She doesn't know anything's wrong. She's probably asleep." Nora nodded. I should call Dana." "In a minute. Sit." She sat, which meant something because Nora didn't sit when she was told to sit. "You came," she said. It wasn't quite the same thing Lily had said at the school gate, but it had a similar quality. The noting of a fact that had been expected but was still being confirmed. "Of course I came." "You brought—" She gestured at the equipment, the crew. "How did you—" "Aviation division. Structural equipment. I called on the way." He paused. "I told you once that I would relocate headquarters to whatever city you chose. Bringing extraction equipment to a crash site is substantially easier." She looked at him. He looked back. "That thing you said," she started. About headquarters. You actually... Yes. You weren't... No. She was quiet. Damien. Nora. She looked at the wreckage again, at the lights and the emergency crews and the frozen field and the tree line beyond it, dark against the dark sky. I got a call, she said. 3 weeks ago, from Johns Hopkins. She didn't look at him. Chief of Trauma Surgery. The program there is... It's the best in the country. It's everything I've been... She stopped. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks, and I haven't told you. He was quiet. Baltimore, she said. That's where it is. I know where Johns Hopkins is. Lily she'd have to change schools. Miss Rita couldn't... She shook her head. I haven't told Lily either. I haven't told anyone because once I tell someone it becomes real, and I don't know... She stopped. I don't know what I'm asking you. I don't even know if I'm asking you anything. He thought about it carefully, about the foundation, about his calendar and his board and the restructuring that was halfway through and the medical innovation program that needed his attention for at least another 8 months. He thought about all of that, and then he set it aside. Take the position, he said. She looked at him. Take it, he said. It's what you've been building toward. You didn't survive 4 years of double shifts and grocery math to turn down Johns Hopkins because of logistics. Lily would thrive in Baltimore. She thrives everywhere. She's already making social assessments and identifying the best benches in any park. She'll have a new school figured out in 3 Tuesdays. He paused. And I told you I would move the foundation. You can't move the foundation for my daughter? He held her gaze. I'm not moving it for you. I'm moving it for Lily. He paused. And maybe a little for you, but primarily for Lily. She stared at him. You have to stop using resources you could be using on yourself for other people, she said. That's not something I can keep watching you do. It's not for other people. It's for my family. The word landed between them. She looked at him for a long time, sitting on a tailgate in a frozen field 40 miles northwest of Chicago with 4 stitches above her eye and a blanket around her shoulders. We're not there yet, she said. You and me. We're not... I don't know where we are. I know. I need more time. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. Take the position. Move to Baltimore. Take the time. He paused. I'll be in Baltimore. She breathed out. It made a small visible cloud in the cold air. You're different, she said, for the 3rd time since the hospital corridor. But this time it came out differently, without the assessment quality. More like a conclusion. I've had reasons to be, he said. She looked at the stitches on her hand from a previous procedure, something he'd noticed her checking on and off. She was always checking on her hands. I wanted to call you, she said. When I realized the frame was going to shift, I thought about calling you. She looked at him. I didn't have the radio, but I thought about it. That was the strange part. She shook her head. 4 years of not thinking about you in emergencies, and now apparently that's where you live. He didn't say anything. That's probably information, she said. Probably, he agreed. She pulled the blanket tighter. Her shoulder was clearly hurting her, the set of her body compensating for it. I need to call Dana. Yeah. She took out her phone. Before she dialed, she looked at him once more, quickly, the studying look, the one she used when she was looking for the thing that changed the interpretation. Whatever she found, she nodded slightly. She made the call. He sat beside her on the tailgate while she talked to her sister, listening to her voice become something else entirely. When Dana put Lily on for a moment, they'd woken her up, or she'd woken herself up, some child's instinct for when the night was wrong. And Lily's voice came through the phone, sleepy and slightly scared, and Nora said, I'm fine, Bug. I'm okay. I'll be home in the morning. Go back to sleep. A pause. Lily's voice again. Yes, Nora said. He's with me. She looked at him as she said it, not performing the look, just doing it. He's with me, she said again. It's okay. Outside, the freezing rain had stopped. The lights made columns in the dark. Somewhere across the field, the emergency crews were doing the work of wrapping things up, the particular quiet of a rescue operation that had ended the way you wanted it to end. Lily went back to sleep. Nora hung up and sat for another minute, the phone in her hand. Then she leaned her good shoulder, just slightly, barely perceptibly, against his. He didn't move. She didn't either. They sat on the tailgate in a frozen Illinois field, and the night went quiet around them, and neither of them said anything because there was something between them that was still finding its shape, still not ready to be spoken into existence, and they both understood that speaking it too soon would make it small, and it wasn't small. It was built from 4 years of absence and 3 Tuesdays and a child who counted staircases and a notebook with a green cover and a folder of forged documents and a drawing with a figure at the edge, and every ordinary impossible thing that had led them here. It wasn't small, it wasn't anything near finished, but it was real, in the way that only things built from honest, damaged materials could be real, without perfection, without clean lines, without any guarantee except that both of them were here and both of them had chosen to keep showing up. That would have to be enough. For now, it was more than enough. She came home on a Wednesday morning. Damien drove her from the site to her building because she wasn't cleared to drive with the shoulder, and because Dana had Lily and someone needed to navigate, and those were the practical reasons, which were real reasons, but they both knew they weren't the only reasons. She slept most of the drive, head against the window, the blanket from the tailgate still across her lap, and he drove carefully on roads that were wet from the night's freezing rain and watched her sleep in his peripheral vision more than he should have been watching anything other than the road. She woke up 10 minutes from Lincoln Park, the way she always woke, not gradually, but all at once, present immediately. "Still driving," she said. "Still driving," he confirmed. She shifted carefully, favoring the shoulder. "I need to call the hospital." "You need to sleep." "I need to call the hospital and then sleep." "Nora, I have patients in follow-up and I need to make sure the handoff. I'll pull over and you can call from the car." He glanced at her. "Then you sleep. Deal?" She considered arguing, decided against it, which told him more about how she was actually feeling than anything she would have said directly. "Deal." She made the call. He pulled into a gas station and sat with the engine running while she ran through patient status with a resident who clearly respected her enough to be thorough and feared her enough to be efficient. He watched the city do its early morning thing around them. Delivery trucks, a woman walking a dog, a man in scrubs coming off a night shift with the specific gait of someone whose body had stopped cooperating. She hung up. "Okay." "Okay," he said, and pulled back out. When he pulled up to her building, she didn't move immediately. He didn't rush her. "Thank you," she said, "for last night. You don't have to I know I don't have to." She looked at him. "I want to. You came. You brought people who knew what they were doing. She paused. "You talked me down off the radio." "You weren't up. You were exactly where you needed to be." "I was managing," she said. "There's a difference between managing and being okay. You knew which one it was." He nodded. She looked at the building. "I'm going to sleep until Dana brings Lily home at noon. Then I'm going to lie on the couch and let her tell me things while I pretend to be more awake than I am." She paused. "Do you want to come? For the Lily part?" He looked at her. "I'm not..." She shook her head slightly. "I'm not making a declaration. I'm asking if you want to come over at noon and sit on my couch while our daughter talks about Raymond and Theo and whatever else needs addressing." "Yeah," he said. "I want to come." "Noon," she said. She got out of the car and went inside, and he sat there for a moment before driving away. The weeks that followed the crash had a different quality than the weeks before it. Not transformed, that would be too simple, and nothing about what was happening between them was simple, but different. The distance that had been a deliberate structure between them, the careful spacing that Nora had maintained because she needed it, and he'd understood that, began to change shape. Not disappear, change. She let him stay for dinner on a Tuesday for the first time. Lily had insisted, and Nora had looked at her daughter and then at him and said, "It's spaghetti," in a tone that communicated this was not a romantic gesture. This was pasta. And he'd said, "Spaghetti is fine." And they'd eaten at her small kitchen table while Lily provided running commentary on the correct ratio of Parmesan to noodle, which was apparently a ratio she had strong opinions about. He did the dishes while Nora put Lily to bed. He could hear them from the kitchen, the bedtime negotiation. One more story becoming two, the lights-out timeline shifting incrementally, Lily's voice asking questions designed to extend consciousness for as long as possible, and Nora's voice answering with the tired patience of someone who knew she was being managed and had made peace with it. By the time Nora came back to the kitchen, he'd finished the dishes and was standing at the counter reading the medical journal she'd left there, the one about trauma protocol updates that she'd been using as a coaster for her forgotten tea. She stopped in the doorway, looked at him. "She asleep?" he asked. "Mostly. She'll hold out another 20 minutes. Nora came in and leaned against the counter beside the sink. "You did the dishes. They were there. You didn't have to. I know." He set the journal down. "Has she said anything more about Baltimore?" Nora had told Lily 2 weeks after the crash. A Saturday morning at the kitchen table, with Raymond the papier-mâché zebra horse present as moral support. Lily had listened with the focused attention she gave things that mattered, and then she'd asked 3 logistical questions. Would the new school have a slide? Was Baltimore near the ocean? And could Raymond come? And upon receiving satisfactory answers to all 3 had said, "Okay," and gone back to her cereal. "She asked yesterday if Baltimore had good hot chocolate places," Nora said. "I told her we'd find out. She said that was the right answer." He almost smiled. "She's going to be fine." "I know." Nora pulled her sweater sleeves down over her hands, a gesture he'd catalogued in the notebook. She did it when she was about to say something she'd been sitting with for a while. "I accepted the position. Formally. I sent the paperwork last week." He looked at her. "Okay. July 1st start. I'll need to find an apartment. Lily's school, there's a good program near the hospital. I've been looking." She said all of this to the middle distance, not him. "Miss Rita's daughter lives in Baltimore. Miss Rita was actually happy about it. Her daughter's been asking her to move for 2 years." "Good. Damien." She looked at him now. Were you serious? About the foundation?" "I already talked to the board," he said. "Baltimore has a better infrastructure base for what we're trying to do with the rural outreach program anyway. It's not a sacrifice. It's a lateral move with better access to the Johns Hopkins Research Network." He paused. Gretchen reviewed the real estate. Nora stared at him. "You talked to your board 3 weeks ago." "Before I accepted." "Before you formally accepted. You'd already decided. I could tell." She was quiet for a moment. "You were very sure I'd take it." "I was sure you should take it," he said. "Whether you did was your decision." "Gee." She looked at him with an expression he'd been seeing more of lately. The one that didn't have a clean label, that existed somewhere between reassessment and something more specific that she hadn't named yet, and neither had he. "The couch thing," she said. "What about it?" "When I asked you to come back at noon, the day after the crash." She pulled her sleeves down further. "That wasn't just about Lily." "I know. I need you to know that I know that too." She said it carefully. I haven't been pretending it was only about Lily." He looked at her. "What has it been about?" "I don't know yet." She said it honestly, without apology. "I know what it was. I know what it felt like when it was good, before everything—" She stopped. "And I know that this isn't the same as that. We're not the same people. Too much happened for us to just—" She shook her head. "But I also know that the person you are now is someone I want to be around. And that's new information. Or new to me information." A pause. "I'm still angry at Victor. I want to be clear about that. I don't know when that's going to ease up. It doesn't need to ease up on a schedule. The criminal referral is moving through. Gretchen's been keeping me updated. She told me. Probable charge of fraud, possible additional counts depending on what the document review turns up." He paused. "He called me." Nora went still. "When?" "Last month. I didn't tell you because I didn't know if there was anything to tell." He held her gaze. He apologized. She said nothing. "It was the kind of apology," Damien said, "that was more about what he wanted than about what he'd done. He said he'd made decisions he regretted. He said he'd believed he was protecting the family. He said he hoped I would consider—" He stopped. "I told him the legal process would proceed and that I had nothing to say to him until it did. And I hung up. Nora was very still. He's 73 years old, she said finally. Yes. Is that supposed to change what he did? No. He said it plainly. It's just a fact about him. She nodded slowly, then she looked at the refrigerator, at the drawings, at Raymond, who had been moved from Lily's backpack to a permanent spot on the kitchen windowsill. You're not going to reconcile with him, she said. Not a question. Not right now. Maybe not ever. I don't know. He was honest about the uncertainty because there was no useful version of pretending he had it resolved. He's still my father. That's a fact about me, not a position I'm taking. She absorbed this. That's fair, she said. People don't have to be good to still be family. They just have to be accountable. She paused. He's not accountable yet. No. When he is, she shook her head. I'll deal with that when it exists. They stood in the kitchen for a moment. From down the hall came a sound that was Lily very specifically not sleeping, the particular quiet of a child who has decided that being awake is more interesting than the alternative. She's going to come out in 6 minutes, Nora said. Should I go? Nora looked at him. No. A pause. Stay. She'll want to say goodnight. He stayed. Lily came out in 4 minutes, not 6, wrapped in a blanket and carrying a stuffed elephant that had recently joined the household hierarchy. She assessed the kitchen situation. Damien still there, Nora with her tea, normal configuration, and apparently found it satisfactory because she went directly to Damien and climbed onto his lap with the unself-conscious efficiency of someone who had decided a thing and was done deliberating about it. You were supposed to be asleep, Nora said. I know. Lily arranged herself. But I thought of a question. What question? Are we going to Baltimore together? She said it to the room, not specifically to either of them. Or separate? Damien and Nora looked at each other over Lily's head. Together, Nora said. Her voice was steady. Different houses at first, but together. Lily processed this. Like a team. Like a team, Damien said. She nodded. Okay. She yawned with her whole body. Now I'm tired. She slid off his lap and went to Nora and raised her arms, and Nora picked her up, favoring the healing shoulder with the automatic adjustment of someone relearning their body's limits, and carried her back down the hall. Damien stood in the kitchen and listened to the quiet of bedtime being settled. He thought, like a team. He thought about all the ways that wasn't enough, and all the ways it was exactly enough, and how those two things could both be true at the same time. Victor Ashford was formally charged in April. 2 counts of document fraud, 1 count of fraudulent interference with legal communications. The charges were laid by independent counsel and covered in 3 paragraphs of a business publication, then picked up by 2 other outlets, then largely moved past by a news cycle that had other things to attend to. The Ashford Medical Technologies Board had released a statement in February, at Damien's direction, that was factual and brief and did not editorialize. The company's stock had dipped for 11 days and then recovered, which told Damien something about how the market evaluated honesty relative to his foundation's quarterly results. Victor did not call again after the charges were filed. Damien did not call him. There was a conversation somewhere in the future that might or might not happen, and he had stopped trying to predict its shape. Some things couldn't be engineered in advance. His father had spent a lifetime believing the opposite, and Damien had spent enough time watching where that ended to understand the lesson without needing to repeat it. What he understood now, and this was the thing that had taken him the longest to see clearly, longer than the documents and the Tuesdays and the frozen field and all of it, was that his father had been afraid of what he couldn't control. He'd looked at Nora and seen a variable that didn't fit the model, a factor that might introduce chaos, and he'd done what he'd always done with things that frightened him. He'd managed them into submission. He'd mistaken control for safety and manipulation for love and the protection of a name for the protection of a family, and he'd been doing it for so long that he'd stopped being able to tell the difference. Damien knew something about that. Not the manipulation. He believed that truly, that he'd never been his father in that particular way. But the control. The preference for a world that behaved according to plan. The discomfort with variables. He'd married Nora knowing she was the opposite of predictable and had spent 2 years of their marriage trying to build a container around that, trying to make his world neat enough that her particular kind of chaos fit into it neatly. And what he'd learned, what he was still learning in the small daily ways that actual lessons arrived, was that the container was the problem. The container was always the problem. He thought about this on the drive to Baltimore in late June, Lily asleep in the back seat with the elephant and a road trip playlist she'd approved in advance, Nora in the passenger seat with her feet on the dash reading the Johns Hopkins orientation materials she'd already read twice but was reading again because that was how she prepared for things. They were driving because Lily had said she wanted to drive and see the country, which at 5 now she felt she was old enough to appreciate. They'd argued about the playlist for 20 minutes before leaving and settled on a compromise that involved several songs Damien didn't recognize and one that Nora had quietly added and then denied adding. They'd stopped at a rest stop in Indiana where Lily had declared the vending machine selection inadequate and negotiated a gas station hot chocolate that did not meet the full marshmallow standard but was, upon consideration, acceptable. It was not a smooth or scenic road trip. It was 10 hours with a 5-year-old's bladder and opinions, and they'd started 40 minutes late because Lily had decided Raymond needed to be repainted before being moved to a new city, a process that had required emergency art supplies and had extended well past the planned departure. And Nora had said the words seriously at a volume and tone that communicated everything about the morning. And Damien had painted Raymond's left stripe while Nora packed the last of the kitchen, and they'd gotten out the door at 9:40 in a state that was efficiently, authentically chaotic, and nothing like what anyone would have planned. He thought about that as he drove, about the gap between the life you designed and the life that actually showed up, about how long he'd thought those two things were supposed to be the same thing, and how long it had taken him to understand they weren't, and how the actual life, the one with the wrong departure times and the inadequate vending machines and the marshmallow negotiations, was the one that mattered. The designed life was for brochures. The actual life was what you were actually living. He'd been living in the designed one for a long time. He was glad to be out of it. "You're thinking loudly," Nora said without looking up from the orientation materials. "Sorry. Don't apologize. I'm curious what it is." He thought about how to say it. "My father spent his whole life optimizing for a version of things that looked right. Image, reputation, the name." He kept his eyes on the road. "And I spent most of my life thinking I wasn't doing that, telling myself I was different because I cared about the work, not the image." He paused. "I wasn't that different." Nora was quiet. "I was optimizing for the right outcomes and not for the right process, and those aren't the same thing." He paused. "The process is where the people are." She put down the orientation materials, looked at the road ahead. "When we were married," she said, "I used to feel like I was something you'd factored in, like I was on a list and you were handling me." She said it without cruelty, as a fact. "You weren't cold about it. You were attentive. But attentive and present are different things." "I know." "And now you're she considered. "You keep a notebook about Lily." "Yeah." "You know the social politics of her preschool class with more depth than I do." "She talks on the way to the coffee place." "You listen." She turned to look at him. "You actually listen. You don't listen and plan your response. You actually hear it." "I'm trying to." "That's what I mean." She turned back to the road. "You're trying differently, not harder at the same thing, differently at the thing." He sat with that. "Is that enough?" A pause. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." From the back seat, Lily said, without opening her eyes, "I think it's enough." They both turned their heads slightly. "I thought you were asleep," Nora said. "I was. I woke up." Lily remained horizontal. "You were talking about Dad." "We were." "I could hear." A pause. "He always comes. That's enough. The rest is extra." Nora looked at Damien. He looked at the road. He thought, she always processes sideways and then comes at the real thing from an angle you didn't see coming. "Go back to sleep, Bug," Nora said. "I know," Lily said, which was not a direct response, but was entirely Lily. "We're almost to the good part anyway." Baltimore in July had a humidity that Chicago didn't warn you about. The apartment Damien had found was 3 blocks from Nora's, which was the distance they'd agreed on, and which was close enough to be practical and far enough to be honest about where they were. He had a guest room for Lily on the weekends she stayed with him, and Lily had chosen the paint color, a particular shade of yellow she described as sunshine but serious, and had supervised the installation of a small shelf for Raymond and the elephant and an expanding collection of other objects whose significance was specific to Lily's internal taxonomy and required no outside explanation. He learned Baltimore the same way he'd learned Lily's world. First the landmarks, then the shortcuts, then the places that mattered for reasons that took time to understand. He found the hot chocolate place first, because that was clearly the most critical infrastructure. He found the park nearest to Lily's new school. He found the Thai place that Nora would like, and the diner that Lily would like, and the coffee shop that was quiet enough in the mornings that Nora could sit with a journal and not be bothered, which she needed more than she'd ever admitted. He built it from scratch, the same way she had built everything from scratch. And he understood something about that process now that he hadn't before. The way building something from the ground up made you understand its weight differently than inheriting it. He'd inherited the corporation, the name, the resources that made every logistical problem solvable. He was building his Baltimore life with nothing he hadn't specifically chosen, and that specificity of choice was the part that felt real. Nora started at Johns Hopkins on a Monday in the first week of July. He drove Lily to her first day at the new school that same morning, rain boots with frogs, because she'd decided frog boots were non-negotiable for first days, and she'd held his hand at the school gate and looked at the building with the focused attention of someone conducting a serious assessment. "It has a slide," she said. "You confirmed that before we moved." "I know, but it's good to verify." She looked up at him. "Are you nervous? About your first day of school?" "About everything," she said. He crouched down to her level, the same way he'd done in the hospital corridor almost 8 months ago. She looked at him with his own eyes. "A little," he said. She seemed to respect this. "Me too." She looked at the building. "But Mama says nervous means it matters." "Your Mama is usually right." "I know." She turned back to him. "You'll be here at pickup?" 3:15, he said. "I'll be here." She nodded once. The same decisive nod from the gymnasium, the checking of the list, and walked into the school. He stood at the gate for a moment after she went in. Then he called Nora. She answered immediately, which meant she was between things. "How was drop-off?" She verified the slide. Of course she did. He could hear the almost smile in it. Was she okay? She was exactly okay, in the specific Lily sense. Good. A pause. "I have 3 surgeries and an intake review. I probably won't surface until 6. "I'll have Lily." "I know." Another pause. "Damien." "Yeah. Thank you for—" She stopped, started differently. "For the apartment being 3 blocks away, for the paint color, for knowing it was yellow before I said so." A pause. "For being at the gate this morning." "Where else would I be?" "I know," she said. "That's the thing." She paused. "I'll see you tonight." "Tonight," he said, and hung up. He stood on the Baltimore sidewalk in July, with the sun already working at the humidity, and thought about a conference in San Francisco 11 years ago, and a woman with a notebook who'd been right about an error rate in a way that had changed everything, and thought about how the thing that had seemed like an ending had been something else entirely. Not the end of the story, but the most painful part of the middle, the part that seemed unsurvivable while you were in it, and that you only understood afterward, when you could see what it had been clearing space for. He didn't believe that suffering was secretly good. He didn't think Victor's cruelty had been part of some larger plan that came out right. He thought it had been wrong, and that it had cost everyone something real, and that some of the cost, those first years of Lily's life, those first years of Nora building everything alone, couldn't be refunded. That was the truth of it, and he'd stopped trying to put a frame around it that made it neat. What he believed was simpler, that people could survive the worst versions of things they'd been handed, and that on the other side of surviving they could make choices about what to build. Nora had built a daughter who was stubborn and confident and processed everything sideways, and had decided by age 4 that she wasn't going to wait for the world to hand her what she needed. She was going to go find it herself. That was Nora's work. That was what those years had made. and Damien had been handed 4 years of believing a lie. And what he'd done with that, eventually, slowly, after the evidence was in front of him, was choose not to let the lie win. That was his only real contribution to any of it, choosing to show up at a park on a Saturday, choosing to wait in a waiting room, choosing to not use resources to win a legal battle he could have won, choosing to sit on a tailgate in a frozen field and not leave. Presence. That was all he'd had to offer, and it turned out it was the only thing that had mattered. He thought about that a lot in the months that followed. Well, the Callahan Ashford Children's Emergency Foundation launched in October. Not with a gala, because Nora had said she would withdraw her name from it if he held a gala, and he believed her. They held a working lunch instead, in a conference room at Johns Hopkins, with 23 people who were in various ways responsible for trauma care in underserved communities across 4 states. And Nora presented the program design in the same way she'd identified a 17% error rate in an algorithm 11 years ago. Directly, specifically, without decorative language, letting the data do the talking. He sat in the back of the room and watched her work. He thought about the trauma corridor in Chicago, 8 months ago. About watching her from behind and knowing her from the set of her shoulders. About how he'd been standing in that corridor with his hand against the wall before he'd understood what he was seeing. The way your body sometimes understood things before your mind caught up. She looked up at one point and found him in the back row. A quick look. She went back to the presentation. He thought about all the things that had been between them in that look. The conference in San Francisco, the algorithm flaw, the years of marriage and the years of absence, the folder of forged documents, a 4-year-old with painted flowers on a lunchbox, 2 hours in a family waiting room, a green notebook, a frozen field, a tailgate in the dark, a drive to Baltimore with a wrong departure time, and a repainted zebra horse and a road trip playlist negotiated in stages. A year ago, he'd stood in a corridor and frozen at the sight of her. Now he sat in the back of a conference room and watched her change how emergency medicine reached the people it had been consistently failing to reach. And he thought, she was always going to do this. Whatever happened or didn't happen, she was always going to end up here. Some people had a direction built into them. A true north that they navigated toward regardless of what the terrain looked like. Nora was one of those people. He'd known that about her from the Q&A, and he'd forgotten it during the years of trying to make her fit a life that was shaped for different priorities, and he'd been reminded of it standing in a corridor, watching her work for 18 hours without stopping, and again every day since. What he could do? What he was actually capable of being was someone who understood her direction and didn't stand in front of it. That was a different thing than what he'd been. It was harder in some ways and simpler in others. It required less management and more honesty and more patience than he'd typically run on. And it was, he was finding, substantially more sustainable than the alternative. They were married on a Saturday morning in April, 14 months after the hospital corridor. Not at a courthouse. Not because the courthouse would have been wrong, but because Lily had strong opinions about the location, and the location she'd identified was the park in Baltimore, where she'd established her preferred bench, sight lines on arrivals and exits, and where she'd spent many Saturday mornings over the past year conducting the business of being 5 and then 6, and figuring out which people in her world she could count on by the simple method of watching whether they showed up. It was a small thing. Nora's sister Dana and her family. Lily's friend from school, a girl named Sophie, who had been deemed essential by Lily and whose parents came as a consequence. Gretchen, who had become something between a legal counsel and an actual friend over the past year. The operations director who'd driven to a crash site in a freezing rainstorm without being asked. Miss Rita, who had moved to Baltimore and was sitting on the bench that Lily had identified as the best bench, wearing a hat that she'd clearly purchased specifically for this. No executives, no board members, no cameras except Dana's phone. The officiant was a judge who'd agreed to hold a Saturday morning ceremony in a park because Nora had explained the situation, and the judge, who had apparently encountered enough complicated situations in her career to recognize a straightforward one, had said yes. Lily held both their hands. She'd been informed of the plan 3 weeks earlier, which was the advance notice she'd requested. She'd asked for 3 weeks when Damien had sat down with her and explained what he wanted to ask her mother, because she'd said she needed time to think about it, which she did, and she'd come back 4 days later and said, "Yes, but I want to hold both your hands, and I want it to be at my park." Both requests were honored. Standing in the park on an April morning with Lily between them, holding both their hands, Damien looked at Nora. She was wearing something simple in a color he didn't have the right word for. Her hair the way she wore it when she wasn't at the hospital. The scar above her eyebrow from the 4 stitches that had faded to nearly nothing but that he knew was there. She looked like herself, which was the most accurate thing he could say about it. Not a dressed-up version. Not a carefully composed version. Just Nora, with her feet slightly angled the way she stood when she was being still. For a length of time, she found long, with the specific way her jaw set when she was managing a feeling she'd decided to have in public. He knew all of it. He was still learning it. Both things were true. "Last chance," she said quietly. The judge had not yet begun. They were standing in the specific pre-ceremony moment of a small outdoor wedding where everything was ready except the starting. "For what?" he said. "To have planned something larger." The corner of her mouth moved. "Gala, string quartet, flower wall." "Hard pass." "I know." She looked at him. The managing expression came down just slightly, just enough. "I've been thinking about what I want to say. The judge has vows, not those." She glanced at Lily, who was swinging their joined hands with the patient energy of someone who had facilitated this event and was now waiting for the adults to perform it correctly. She looked back at him. "I've been thinking about what I actually want to say to you, not the formal version." She paused. "I want to say that I know this isn't a second chance. It's not a redo. It's something different. And I was afraid of it for a long time because different is harder to predict." She paused. "But I'd rather have something real that's hard to predict than something smooth that's a lie." He thought about the notebook with the green cover, about the drawing with the figure at the edge, about a tailgate in February and a television on mute in a hospital waiting room, and the email from 11 years ago with the terrible subject line that had somehow worked. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I know." She said it the way Lily had said it, in her own key. "That's the thing." She took a breath. "Okay." She looked at the judge. "We're ready." Lily held both their hands. The judge spoke. The park did what April parks did. Birds, light through new leaves, a dog somewhere near the far gate being corrected by its owner. The ordinary, imperfect sounds of a Saturday morning in a city that didn't know or care what was happening in its 4th-row center bench area. When it was over, Lily looked up at both of them and said, with the satisfied certainty of someone who had identified a problem and watched it resolve according to her specifications, "Good. Now we're a real team." "We were always a team," Nora said. "I know." Lily released their hands and went directly to Miss Rita on the bench, having clearly fulfilled her ceremonial function. "But now it's official." Damien watched her go. Nora slid her hand into his. Not a big gesture, just a hand. He held it. He thought about what it meant. Not the ceremony, not the title, but this specific thing, the choosing to be here, the ordinary daily choosing that was the only version of love that actually worked. Not the grand gesture, though the grand gesture sometimes mattered. The showing up at 3:15, the correct marshmallow, the notebook, the tailgate, the 3 blocks of distance that said, "I understand what you need, and what you need is not the same as what I want. And both of those things are okay." The truth was that he had not deserved any of this when he first walked through those hospital doors 8 months ago. He'd had money and resources and the particular confidence of someone who had never been told no by a logistical problem. What he hadn't had was the thing that actually mattered, the understanding that presence was its own form of love and that the only version of family worth having was the one you built on honesty about what you didn't know yet and patience about finding out. Lily had known it first. She'd been waiting for someone with her eyes. She'd handed him the name without ceremony and expected nothing except that he keep showing up. He kept showing up. Nora leaned against his shoulder. The good one. The one that didn't have the old injury. Around them, April was being April, unimpressive and real. The kind of ordinary that turns out to be everything when you've spent enough time without it. Some people look for the perfect version of things. The right moment, the right words, the seamless, frictionless arrival at a life they'd designed in advance. Damien had spent years being that person, and he was done with it. The real version had a repainted zebra horse and rain boots with frogs, and a wrong departure time, and a green notebook, and 4 stitches, and 11 hours of driving across the Midwest, and a 5-year-old who held both your hands and said, "Good, now it's official." And it was harder than the designed version, and more embarrassing and less predictable, and it was the only thing that had ever been actually worth having. He stood in the park on a Saturday morning in April with his wife's hand in his, and his daughter on a bench across the grass being told something important by Miss Rita, who was wise and unflappable and wore excellent hats, and he thought, this is it. Not the end of something, the beginning of the ordinary. The ordinary was everything.